Welcome, everyone. This is the fifth episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. With us today is me, your typical host, Ryan, and we've got a new crew member today, Lawrence. How you doing, buddy?
I am great. Thanks for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
We've been talking about this for a while, so finally we get to do an episode together. Finally got a podcast off the ground and just kind of seeing what happens here. And so the topic today we're going to be going over is something you and I have been discussing for forever.
Forever.
And it's fighting games. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what we want to see happen in fighting games in the future going forward. We're on the edge of next gen consoles with the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. So we imagine a lot of stuff's probably going to come over, but we don't have too much hard confirmation other than some of the news we're going to talk about. But yeah, you and me, we've been playing fighting games for a long time and together for a real long time.
Some of those fighting games led to actual fights. And I wouldn't have it any other way. When you sit there and you hate your best friend, that's how you know it was a good gaming night.
Yeah, the amount of arguments and trash talking, and we've had this kind of discussion here. But even recently, the other day, the reason why we finally decided to coordinate and get this going is because our conversation kind of moved into a new territory, and I had an idea, and we got some good stuff going, and so I'm like, okay, we finally need to record this. But for our audience here, who's not really aware of us, and is kind of hearing about fighting games for the first time here, other than Smash Brothers, despite that being a divisive opinion on whether or not it's a fighting game, but we're not going to get into that.
I like how you just cut me off at the pass immediately.
Yeah, we don't have to. We're not getting into that. People can think what they want.
I got hit with the blue shell right off the gate. That's great. That's fantastic.
Exactly. So let's start by telling the audience a little bit about our history with fighting games so they understand that we're not completely ignorant to what we're talking about. So Lawrence, when did you start playing fighting games, and what's been your experience growing up and to this point with fighting games?
Well, as a person who is how should I say, who has aged gracefully, I've been playing fighting games a very, 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 very long time. And Street Fighter 2. Actually, no, Street Fighter, 2 for the Super Nintendo. I think it was my first one.
Okay.
And I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. I think my favorite character at the time, believe it or not, even though I don't use them at all these days, it was Dhalsim. It was actually my favorite character at the time. It was Dhalsim. I don't know. I mean, it was the era of Stretch Armstrong, and I'm like, hey, that guy's Stretch Armstrong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So let's go use him. I didn't know anything about any other character or any other part of the world because I was like 6. But
yeah, and what's better than a character that doesn't have to get close to enemies to hit them, right?
Yeah. That's my shameful spammer days. But no, I've been playing ever since, and I walked into an arcade and played Tekken 1 for the first time, and you know how I feel about Tekken.
Yeah.
You do. Tekken and I should grab hands and run away to a faraway land where no one will ever bother us ever again. I love that game. I think I love that game more than I loved people, and I have kids, so that's just a lot.
Yep. Yeah. That is your favorite fighting game series, right?
It is my favorite fighting game series, but I've been in love with just fighting games since I pushed a button, somebody got punched in the face. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in love. Like, it's mostly because it's not really encouraged in real life. So, electronically was a good way to get that out.
Absolutely.
How about you, buddy?
So for me, and we have a lot of overlap in terms of the fighting games, because when our friendship started, we kind of met starting with fighting games in our one club, and then as we've hung out, we made it a thing to try out as many fighting games, and we pretty much have grown up with all the same historical fighting games. So for me, I can't say exactly what one it is, but it's definitely got to be like Street Fighter 2 and a couple of those other like really obscure or niche licensed fighting games like Turtles, the Tournament Fighters on Super Nintendo. I played a bunch.
I remember that.
And I totally didn't know how to play it then. Like I didn't understand it was Street Fighter, and it wasn't. And I think I rented it from Blockbuster several times, and it didn't have a manual, so I didn't know to look for special moves and how to do that. So I was pretty much pressing the face buttons. And same thing with Street Fighter 11. I played in the arcade, and I can't remember if I played it first on the Super Nintendo or actually in the arcade, because there was a bowling alley in my neighborhood where I did a lot of bowling, and they did have a Street Fighter 2 cabinet. So I can't remember which version I played first, but it kind of happened at the same time as it was the heyday of fighting games, was back in the arcade scene back in the late 90s. or
Oh, don't
mid
forget
to
about
late 90s.
I forgot to add one. I'm sorry to cut you off. Virtual Fighter was huge back then. Like super huge. Like it was, I think it was on a border between Virtual Fighter and Tekken. Like it was very close. Which one? And like a brief change in anything could have made Virtual Fighter the thing that took off before Tekken. But I think Virtual Fighter didn't take off because it was actually very technical even compared to Tekken. Like, like it was ridiculous.
It did
But
come out a little earlier than Tekken, didn't it? Because also it was Sega produced, so it was kind of locked to Sega Saturn.
mhm.
And then Tekken 1 came out on PlayStation. And there's all sorts of inside baseball about the technical aspects of Sega Saturn versus PlayStation that meant that the graphics were different. So part of that would probably be the appeal, because Tekken 1 was, by comparison, still much more visually impressive at the time. So there might have
Right.
been that. And I missed one of the most important fighting games, and I'm going to kind of name all the series. And you and I have played mostly the same ones, minus some of the obscure fighting games that we may have played one-off or occasionally with other people. Mortal Kombat. Like, I grew up mostly on Mortal Kombat in the arcades, and then, of course, on home consoles playing MK1, 2, 3, Ultimate 3, of course, and then kept up with those fighting game series. I played a lot of Street Fighter Alpha on PlayStation when I started realizing that Alpha was a thing, and then just kind of kept up with fighting games here and there because the general systems are super fun. I didn't really play much of Tekken or Virtua Fighter. I did try them once or twice in the arcades, but it didn't really stick. It was different, and I didn't really understand how to play fighting games because way back when, and this will be part of the crux of our discussion later on, is that fighting games take a lot to learn, especially way back when, because they didn't have the internet. They didn't really tell you how to do special moves. They wanted you to figure it out and everything to kind of be a mystery, and the community kind of built itself up based on repeated play and so on. But then once the internet age came and strategy guides and stuff like that became more widely available, it was way easier to learn and figure out what the basics were and start learning how to actually play. And so I got more and more interested in fighting games as I got better at playing them. And I mostly played them at home. I didn't have a lot of people to play fighting games with myself. I had a few friends here or there that would mess around, mostly with Mortal Kombat. And Mortal Kombat's on the simpler side of games, which is probably why we gravitated towards it more. But that was my history, and going forward, we tried things from, of course, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat kind of kept up, although they've kind of, their appeals changed based on which version it is. Marvel vs. Capcom, Soul Calibur,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Sorry.
completely fine. Soul Calibur, you got me into Tekken, then Blaze Blue, Guilty Gear. I kind of went backwards in that regard. I don't know what really hooked me about Blaze Blue. It was probably the anime aesthetic, and then I learned about Guilty Gear through that. And then we've kind of evolved. Sam Show's come back, so Samurai Showdown. So we've got that, and then some of the other random versus games. And of course, I've delved into more of the arena fighters that have come out that are mostly anime games.
Oh,
And you've played some of those with me.
You broke my heart. We forgot about our Terry Bogards, baby.
King of Fighters, that's right. You got me into
Ah,
King of Fighters as well.
so good. So
SNK
good.
versus Capcom, or
Mhm.
Capcom versus SNK 2 primarily. So we've played all of those, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else we missed. Like I could go through the whole
Killer Instinct.
list.
We played those.
Killer Instinct, we brought that back with the new version as well.
We played a bunch of anime crossover games.
Yep.
Like In Night. We played. We played.
Yeah, we
a
tried
lot
Under
of
Night.
games. We played that one monster game, which was really horrible. I don't remember the name of it, and I hope I never do.
Yeah, and that goes into that also plays into the point we're getting to later is what we want to see in fighting games and how fighting games have tried to experiment, and mostly multiplayer versus games that involve melee combat if you really want to get technical about it. But before we go from there and talk about some of our favorite fighting games, I did want to go over some of the news that happened this weekend, because Evo got canceled this year due to a number of things, including not only the pandemic, which Evo made the move to put everything online, which was not necessarily a great plan either, and they had to change around their plans for that as well, because most of the Japanese games don't have very good online infrastructure, and a number of Western games do, but they're not quite as big, and Evo has their own agenda when it comes to what games they pick, though they did shift around in order to accommodate this new environment with everyone having to be home. But then there were other problems as well, as people who ran it and a lot of high or well-known top tournament players were getting sexual assault allegations against them, and so it kind of threw everything into chaos. So Evo 2020 got canceled, and Japan decided to do this group roundtable thing where they just basically got online and did a bunch of their announcements that they probably had planned for Evo at that point. So let me talk about a few of the things here and see if we've got any personal reactions. Starting off, Samurai Showdown Season 3 got announced, so more DLC fighters, I believe. They've released quite a number of characters already via DLC. Currently 10, and then they're going to be adding they are adding a guest character from the For Honor game by Ubisoft, which is fun.
Okay.
Funny. And then I guess they're adding I don't see a listing here. I'm looking at eventhubs.com. It has 25 characters, 26 once Gong Sun joins. And if things are following with the 2 years prior, we may have 31. That's a good healthy number. Any thoughts on the new Samurai Showdown and its DLC?
Yeah, I am. Let me start off by saying that as a person who has been very heavy into the Samurai Showdown games of the past, I big ups to Galford. Galford's my boy. I loved it. I love the fact that somebody was like, you know what, it's time. Let's bring it back, and they did that, and they exceeded my expectations. I will say it took me a little bit to get into it, only because that a lot of the games that we play are a lot faster paced.
Right,
So
yeah.
my brain had to like get into it. I mean, I am the guy who plays Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the highest speed.
Right.
And that's normal to me.
Yeah, and Samurai
So
Showdown is very deliberately paced to be like heavy damage and light hits. Like you barely can do more combos unless it's a multi-hit attack.
right. So I mean that kind of mental regression in order to play, and that's how it is with every game. You know, we will play a game, and then we will forget that this game's mechanics are extremely different. So we need our brain to acclimate for like a second.
Right, and the learning curve of each new installment, which is another point that we're going to get to about our core discussion here, is always something that you hope clicks immediately, and it's typically part of the fun of getting into fighting games, but it does have its issues as well.
It does that definitely has its drawbacks. But I'm sorry to get to your main question. I'm excited. I'm excited for any new add-ons and iterations you got for games. I mean, it was definitely well received when Samurai Showdown came out. So I mean, the more the merrier. This is definitely one of those cases where too much is definitely not a bad thing. There's been plenty of games where I've played where they're like, you know what, we're gonna just give you more characters, and you look at them and you're like, well, that's not the reason why I didn't play the game, but thanks. This is great. I'm excited to see who they decide to bring into the fold this time around.
Okay, and have you had a chance to look at the video for the new For Honor guest character that's coming to Samurai Showdown?
I actually haven't. If you can tell me a little bit about that, I'd be appreciated.
Yeah, if you hadn't, I did want to just say that one doesn't look too exciting. The way he moves, I'm assuming it's a dude. It's a fully armored dude, and I believe it's like a male voice actor. It looks very plain. So in a way, it sticks out because the armor's not even like it doesn't look as stylized as the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was just early footage, so they could touch it up by the end. But the way the character seems to move in the short clip that they put out looks very basic, not as flashy as the other characters. Although the super it has is kind of funny and very in keeping with it. And maybe that was a deliberate choice. This is a medieval knight, and so we're going to make it look different by being this very straightforward, heavy swing character. Not that the other characters aren't heavy swings, but there's like a flash and a style that you're looking for. And so maybe that's a visual distinction they're doing on purpose, but that could also hurt the character because we usually typically pick a character because at first glance they look really fun to play.
Well, I have no bias. I have no bias when it comes to this character because I have
Right.
I've barely dove into the those games, that particular title. Like I barely even tipped my toe into the pool, which is that game. So I have nothing to look forward to and also nothing to disappoint. So when it comes to characters
Sure.
like that, based off of franchises I've never played, I can give it an open opinion.
Oh, and so the other character they announced, because I'm like 2 characters behind, the Knight is coming out soon, but apparently this will be a free DLC character. They're adding a new female character. It's a guest character. Her name is Gongsun Lee from the mobile game Honor of Kings. So that's pretty cool. So that's pretty cool that character is free as well.
Mhm.
SNK's been doing a really good job with marketing their products and doing good promotions with not only just Samurai Showdown, but SNK is also in charge of King of Fighters. So Terry Bogard's been around lately.
Terry Terry's the man. Like, you know how I feel about it. Like,
Yeah, and Geese Howard getting into Tekken 7. That was also really
yeah,
big.
you know how I feel about that one as well.
Well, why don't you tell our audience just a quick
About
impression?
Geese.
Yeah, about your reaction to Geese. Not only initially, but once you played him.
I wasn't too terribly excited. Geese was never really one of my go-to and favorite characters. As you said previously, a lot of the times when you pick a character, there are people who pick characters because they're easy to flow, easy to combo, and easy to master. Those are different than people who pick an initial character going, I like your aesthetic, I like your style. You make me feel good playing and looking at this character. And Geese was one of those characters I said who didn't strike out to me. We have a Geese character in every game. You're evil, big shot, like it's just like, I don't know. It's anyway. I wasn't too terribly excited. There's plenty of King of Fighter characters, even without me being biased and automatically going to Terry or Kyo. There's plenty of characters from the whole, and we have had new iterations, like just revamps, and there's so many different characters who have been changed and brought back that you could have put in Tekken if you wanted to do that with guest characters. I mean, that is cool that they brought somebody from the King of Fighters franchise.
Highlighting a main villain also.
Right. I mean, there's Rugal. Now, I also understand why they didn't bring Rugal in, because Rugal is really close to Akuma. Rugal is that game's Akuma.
Okay.
Rugal is Akuma with a college degree.
Oh.
like that's the best way I can put it. Hi, I went to Harvard. Like, it's just.
That's amazing. But I think we can both agree that Geese making it into Tekken was totally not predictable. Moving on.
Did you really? Oh, I'm so mad at you right now.
Moving on. Soul Calibur 6 had some announcements as well.
I don't think I can move on from that. I don't think I can move on. I think it's over. No?
Please don't hang up. I can't do this episode without you. Well, I mean, I could, but it'd be a lot more sad.
The one-man show.
hopefully not have to do that yet, but someday it probably will. But not today.
Not today.
Soul Calibur 6 put out some news this weekend with some updates coming. We're in the middle of Season Pass 2. So it unveiled and confirmed its third DLC character, which is returning character Setsuka. On top of showing off that she's there and updated for 6.
Time out. I'm sorry. Setsuka is the woman with the umbrella, if I believe, right?
Yeah, with the sword tucked in her umbrella.
Okay. All right. Okay.
It looks like there's a little bit more umbrella play, like she's going to use her umbrella as part of her guard impact animation, so that's pretty cool.
That just sounds bad. I like my girls when on umbrella play. That's just bad.
So she got announced her classic costume, which I believe was from 3 and 4. I think there was a little bit of style change, but no, she did. And who knows if they'll have more, but they showed off just the one original costume. On top of that, which will be close to your heart, is that they announced for their character creation expansion set that'll come out with Setsuka, they're adding in all the standard costumes, it looks like, from the Tekken 7 characters.
I'm sorry, what?
So you're going to be able to make Soul Calibur characters.
I heard you. I'm trying not to squeak. I heard you. I'm just.
Yeah, you'll have to check out that trailer. They show off probably about 7 characters. Heihachi's obviously there. Asuka's there. I don't think I saw Jin, but he's clearly going to be there.
Funniest thing about Heihachi and in the Soul Calibur franchise, for a guy who didn't have the largest like range or hitbox, like I think maybe because like I know how to Tekken.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wipe the dirt off my shoulders right now when I said that. Since I know how to Tekken, when he was put in Soul Calibur, and I absolutely loved it, dominated. I have no idea why I dominated. I'm like, I'm gonna headbutt Noogie the world. It was fantastic.
Right, and correct me where I'm wrong. Soul Calibur 2, the PlayStation 2 version, had Heihachi as a full guest character, adapted for the Soul Calibur style. You didn't have Tekken buttons, right? They actually adapted him for Soul Calibur style.
They did, but he pretty much played the same.
Okay. Then in Soul Calibur 3, which was also exclusive to PlayStation 2, I don't remember. Did Soul Calibur 4 or 5 also have a Jin style?
Yes, in the character creator. In the character creator,
right.
You can use the soul of Jin and have his Devil Jin style.
So Tekken has crossed over, and Tekken and Soul Calibur are both owned by Bandai Namco, coming from the Namco side of that. So they're made by different developers, but their teams are closely entwined. So it's not difficult for them to cross over characters.
I mean, that's true. And Yoshimitsu has always been the bridge between the two games anyway.
Right. They've always had a Yoshimitsu character in there, though they're all distinctively designed they share some moves, and of course Tekken and Soul Calibur, despite being 3D fighters, play completely differently from each other. One's focused more on fists, the other one's a weapon fighter. But they have had those cool crossovers between each other. Not super heavy, but still
No, no,
there.
but definitely veering
Yeah,
from that, what you just said. If it, that's why I believe that, speaking of Tekken and that game, that Noctis would have been better in Soul Calibur, to me personally.
I
And
agree
I
with you. And it's funny because clearly someone said, "Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense." But guess what? Which I'm
but guess
assuming
what?
that's Harada-san.
Right, we're
Yep.
not going to do that. That makes great. That makes you know what? That's like you giving me relationship advice. Hey, dude, you shouldn't do that. You're absolutely right. I should not do that. I'm going to do it anyway. Like,
Yep. And we also and related to that is when Harada-san, the producer of Tekken, blatantly lied a long time ago about Negan from The Walking Dead. Yes, The Walking Dead TV
uh,
show, not ever going to appear in Tekken. Lo and behold, months later, Negan is a guest character from that, which he's unique, but and a weapon fighter as well, which is another interesting part. But I get it. Soul Calibur has been pretty consistent with its aesthetic in certain ways, with the probably the biggest departure, minus the weird anime guest characters that were in Soul Calibur 4, to be from Nier Automata, from Square Enix's Nier Automata being in Soul Calibur 6. They've been pretty consistent with the aesthetic. Geralt from The Witcher being a headliner guest character for Soul Calibur 6 is at least medieval era, and Soul Calibur 6 keeps in that like medieval era of the world while it's still focused. Well, it branches between the greater parts of Europe and
do you know
Japan.
what 2B? You know what 2B reminds me of, which is
What's that?
why I think 2B reminds me of Dante from Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I mean, she's very, very, very versatile. If
I
you
see
know
what
how
you're saying.
like it's certain characters have their okay, well, short range, long range, are able to combo or quick turn or
Right.
super fast. Like she encompasses all of these things, which makes her definitely a force to be reckoned with. Like if you
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing with her, chances are you can get lucky. But if you know what you're doing with her, it's surgically precise. It's crazy. She's a great character.
Right.
And as much as I want to hate her because she beats me a lot, I can't.
She has a huge varied toolkit, and I think the Dante comparison is apt as well because of the way Dante acquires new weapon styles, not only having his basic swords and guns, but also fist weapons and other magical tools. 2B has a very similar thing where you acquire different types of swords and lances and different weapon types. And so, yeah, that's a very apt comparison. I don't want to linger too long on the news section here. So the other thing of note, character balance changes are coming, and that's hit or miss based on how you feel and what changes get made to your favorite characters. But also, they are adding in the option, which I know our friend Jim is I believe enthusiastic about this. I don't remember if you felt the same way. I could kind of take it or leave it, but I am happy it's being added. They are adding in the option to turn off armor breaking altogether.
Huh.
I think you'll still get like guard breaks as normal, but no longer will the visual change occur where the top, middle, or bottom part of your armor will get broken from specific attacks or situations. So they're allowing people to turn it off because that is something from the fan community and that makes sense with how the custom creator for the characters is such a big staple feature for the Soul Calibur series, and people spend a lot of time crafting their characters, and then for their armor to get broken halfway through and start looking extra dumb, even though it's meant to have somewhat of a comedic effect and emulate fights as, in real life it would break off armor if you were hit enough times. But it is nice that they're listening to fans and adding that in, and it's good to have an option.
I was gonna say it didn't bother me personally until you added that last part. And you're right. People spend a lot of time, and some of them are very, very impressive. People spend a lot of time in your custom creator getting right down very, very nice details. You yourself are very particular about the way characters look.
Yeah, I have my
Especially a breastplate on a certain character that you went straight off the rails with. That's all I'm gonna say.
Oh yeah, I thought Hilda's update compared to her previous one, it felt like they were adding extra sexualization that just didn't need to be there. Granted, she's still not showing cleavage, but I think the boob armor thing is dumb personally, and I like to change it even though the alternate I picked her is kind of the same thing. I just think it looks neater than her default. So,
Well,
yeah, I kind of overreacted on that, but it is something where
just a
I
weird
at least have the privilege of changing it thanks to the features of the game.
But that's what I'm trying to make. Some people care about the aesthetics of a character a lot. It's never say bad.
Yeah.
So it gives you the option to turn it on and off after all the. And yes, it can be time consuming depending on what you're trying to do. So I do think it's great. Me personally, it's like, okay, I made this character look cool. Armor breaks. The armor breaks kind of feed me this thing that says, hey, you don't want to break your armor? Get good. But you know how my brain works when it comes to that whole thing. So, but no, I agree with you 100%. I think certain things and companies actually listening to fans for once, as opposed to being a bunch of stuffy guys in suits in a boardroom going, how can we make more money? No, like listen to fans. I think that's great.
Yeah, and that's totally a fair point about the get good, and that's a nature of fighting games as well in the competition. So I'm sure part of their rationale for including that feature to begin with was if you don't want your character's armor breaking, which is supposed to kind of impart some sort of visual shame, then you want to be better at it to prevent your armor getting broken in the first place.
Shame,
So,
shame. The
so,
Scarlet
th-
Letter.
so that is good news all around there. And now I'm going to talk quickly about your favorite game, Tekken 7, and the changes
Oh,
or the updates that are coming there.
I thought my favorite game was Shoots and Ladders.
I mean, you can change your mind as you go, but my impression of fighting games was that, oh wait, is Shoots and Ladder a fighting game? This is a revelation.
I mean, it depends if I'm winning or not, and if I'm playing with family, it can become a fighting game. I'm just.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I'm like, it's the new versions. Shoots and Ladders, Revelations. It's like the new expansion.
I know the blood code for that game. That game's fun.
The Tekken 7 news was pretty bare bones with some teases and a trailer. Season 4 content is announced. That means new characters. They straight up said new moves are coming to every single character. So that's dope. We'll have to see what those new moves are, but that's welcome, as always, to have more options to play with the characters, even though every character's move list is practically 100 moves per character now. But always happy to have some new stuff.
I mean, you said you. Okay, the reason I can't remember things in real life is because I still remember things from, I don't know, a bajillion years ago that I shouldn't. Like moves and codes. Like the blood code for Mortal Kombat 1 is A, B, A, C, A, B, B, start. Like, I shouldn't know that.
And our audience may fact check you on that. So if you messed up one letter, how mad are you going to be?
I'm pretty confident.
I believe you. It's just always funny when you think you have something memorized and then you say it out loud and someone's like, no, you like, it was actually like B-A. And it's like, shut up. Anyways. But yeah, moving on to the Tekken news there. They said they're making online updates. Now, this is going to be, once again, another point we'll get to. It has come out from producer Harada that Tekken 7 does use rollback netcode. It just tends to not work well from his explanation. It's that 3D animations play weird with rollback netcode. But they are trying to tighten it up, is what we're inferring from that. On top of the one screenshot they showed is that they're now going to add a Wi-Fi indicator, as it is a big contention in the fighting game community, is that when you play with an Ethernet cable, it's a way more stable connection for both players if they're both wired in. And some people prefer to avoid playing with people who are on Wi-Fi connections because they want the most stable matches possible. And considering that we're in a pandemic here with most people quarantining, top tournament players always looking for fresh competition, and the only way to get that right now safely is online. They probably want to avoid playing with as many Wi-Fi people as possible. So that's just a nice option to have, and people will be able to make that decision for themselves who they want to play with. If they're just playing for fun, and they probably won't care, but for the more competitive people, they'll be able to avoid that. So it's nice that that's being added in, and hopefully we will see some general improvements to the stability of Tekken 7's online as well in their rollback net code. You and I have been playing a lot online, so we know for a fact that it's pretty good, but it could be better.
Right.
And we both play wired as well, as we've made that concession for each other, and that has been at least allowing us to have the optimal experience possible for us. Then at the very end of that trailer, they teased their next character, and it wasn't very obvious, but people are making a pretty good guess, so I want to get your initial reaction to the idea of this character returning, because they seem to be teasing a returning character. They showed a scene of a blazing like sunset, and it looks like a Japanese tower, and on top of it you could vaguely see a figure that seemed to have some elements streaming off them. I'm assuming it's hair and a scarf, but people are guessing that the character that's returning is Kunimitsu.
Um,
How would you feel about that being true in
well,
general?
well, you personally know my quote unquote play style in Tekken. I'm an all arounder. Like I like to be decent with at least a majority of the roster.
Right, you'll play every
Um,
character at least twice.
right, I'll play every character because that's how I go. Don't get a confused, audience. I'm not like the wizard with every character. I like to be well rounded with every character. So I mean, it wouldn't be a bad thing for them to bring that character back. I do have my favorites I would like to see before that character comes back. I mean, you got Fakuram who just showed up. So
Right.
Bruce Irving, chances are they're not going to bring him back for a while unless you get another Tekken tag, which is essentially a dream match. Let's see. Tosan was one of my favorites. He played a little bit different than Huang, so he was definitely one of my favorites. But yeah, I wouldn't be too disappointed. If they would have brought in a different guest character, maybe that would have been cool. But I know how some people feel about guest characters. Don't get attached to them because chances are they won't come back. I don't really have a negative or positive opinion on this character, really. So we would have to wait and see. I guess the linchpin on that whole thing would be the move set they decided to bring, and also the new moves they decided to add. So that playing around with the new character, that will determine whether or not something I can get behind.
Harada did mention several times that when they're picking characters for rosters, they're trying to pick characters that people do play. So they're very well aware of popularity, and so they understand when people complain that their favorite character doesn't make it in there. But they do try to make data-driven decisions in terms of Tekken that Harada's admitting. So Kunimitsu, as I said, she wasn't played a lot, and from what I understand, she wasn't played a lot, which is why she's only appeared in Tekken 2. I don't remember if
Yes.
she appeared in Tekken 3, and in the Tekken Tag games, which pretty much tries to include every single character.
Right. Right.
So,
As long as they don't bring back Gone, I'm fine.
and that apparently was a guest character as well. So there's pretty much no way that's going to happen.
No, Gone can go away forever. Like, this Gone and Tekken was the same argument between in Yoda and Soul Calibur. Like, like
For those who aren't aware who Gon is, he was a guest character in Tekken 3. He was this little dinosaur that was from a comic in Japan.
he was the
And
bane
so
of my existence.
he was a secret guest character, very unfair to fight against because he was so low that most attacks didn't touch him. But he was there for giggles. So him being a guest character means he's probably not coming back. In the comics, not like long running or super popular at this point. So
If I
it
could
is
take that character, clone it, and make it into an actual living being, I would put it into a spaceship and send it into the cold abyss of space, never to be heard from again.
And I think a lot of people agree with you in that because Namco did eventually kind of repeat that, even though it is a different developer inside the Namco house, when they did Soul Calibur 4's guest characters, where Yoda was temporarily exclusive to the Xbox 360 version, and he had much of the same issues where most attacks went over his head. He couldn't be grabbed, but he could do grab attacks, which is a huge disadvantage in the balance of Soul Calibur. So yeah, similar ideas there that are meant to be for fun, but don't pan out as well in play.
Just one more thing about guest characters. I know it's more like a business aspect than anything else, but it's too bad these franchises won't branch out to more anime companies and more anime studios, or even though Marvel is owned by Disney and that's like a ridiculous amount of red tape. There are a lot of characters who are like sword bound or martial arts bound that would go great in these games. Like for instance, I would love to see Iron Fist in a Tekken game. Like, I would love that. Like that's his whole thing is martial art. Now I can see how he would play very similar to Law, because most martial arts characters in any other like franchise, Bruce Lee is often the basis of these characters. So I can see how you play too similar to Law for Iron Fist, but there's like Quan Chi. There's a lot of characters that would go great in like Wolverine would be fantastic in Soul Calibur.
That could work. That could work pretty well. Yeah, he'd be an interesting type of weapon character that'd be kind of close range, and since he does have the built-in healing factor, not that Soul Calibur doesn't play around with the idea of people getting impaled and having zero damage, sort of in a more playful way than Mortal Kombat's straight up gory visuals.
There's also Silver Samurai. Silver Samurai was awesome. I was a great character.
Right, but we already have enough like straight up samurai characters. I mean, Soul Calibur 6 they just added DLC character guest Haomaru, and they have Mitsurugi, and those two play very differently, but aesthetically it starts to look visually too similar.
Right. But even if you cross over into the anime aspect, you have, I believe, forgive me if I'm wrong, is his name Zoro from One Piece?
That, yeah, would be an interesting concept considering he has the three swords.
At 6, if he gets all crazy with it. As you can tell, I don't really watch One Piece.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And at the same time, that also leads into it's not like those characters don't get play in other games. Marvel, of course, does put out some different fighting game. Well, not really too many fighting games, but they put out Ultimate Alliance 3 on Switch that we played, and unfortunately was very disappointing. And then there's also the Arena Fighters for anime where Zoro has appeared, and that's more of a mechanical difference because the character style is there, but you don't have much mechanical expression because they play. A lot of the characters don't allow for the creativity, which is a point where we'll get into later. But yeah, so that's the thing. You also got to be careful because obviously samurai are pretty cool or samurai type characters, but they can start to look and feel, or they give off an impression of being very similar simply because of being the same type of character, even though they can
Well,
play
I mean,
different.
how many ways can you paint a samurai, honestly, before you
What
start
get
repeating brushstrokes?
So let me segue on that because the last thing I want to, well, not the last thing, segueing to the next announcement is from Arc System Works, who had some Guilty Gear Strive news, and they finally unveiled their new character that was teased all the way during the first trailer at the end, the samurai with the mechanical robot mask. That's all we knew about him. And now they finally showed off his gameplay, and he too is truly a samurai, and his name is Nagori Yuki. Did you have a chance to look at the trailers for both the new character Nagori Yuki for Guilty Gear Strive and the returning character Leo Whitefang?
Leo. I did not. Normally, it's you who keeps me all hip and legit with all these things. Forgive me for my lack of attention when it came to that.
No problem.
So,
Just double checking if you might have seen that on your own. So he does have a very straight up samurai style. It's hard to tell if he's truly a rushdown or if he's going to be a heavy swinger from the brief video glimpses we've seen. He's got some very flashy, heavy sword swing style attacks. It kind of looks like this might be like a Biken redo. Not saying he is connected to Biken in any way, for sure, in story wise, but some of the moves and the way he was moving looked very similar to Biken style, who is also the original kind of traditional samurai, who also has gimmick style attacks thanks to her trick missing arm. So it's interesting whether or not he was meant to be the initial like replacement for Biken, as some fighting games tend to take an old character, repurpose them. We've seen this a bunch of Tekken 7, where they make a new character as an excuse to take the moveset from an old character and revamp it a bit in ways that aren't as familiar or true to the old character. And this is surprising as well because Arc System Works put out a survey asking in multiple regions their popularity poll, and other than one region, I believe, Biken was pretty much number one across the board for characters. I think it was actually Japan. She's not the most popular in there, but I could be wrong. I don't have the table in front of me, but you can look that up. So it'll be interesting to see if we have both Biken and Nagori Yuki appear. And then yeah, to cap that off is Leo Whitefang, who is returning from the Guilty Gear Xrd series. That was the previous iteration, and they're making a bunch of changes to what Guilty Gear's gameplay is like with Strive. How did you feel about playing as Leo in the previous game, and do you have a feeling about him returning?
I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed Leo. Of course, you know my favorite types of characters in certain games. So how I enjoy a character, I'm definitely biased, and then when it comes to
As we all are.
certain games and certain characters. For instance, speaking of the game similar to Guilty Gear, Blaze Blue, you know a lot of my favorite characters in there, and Leo plays very similar to me, or at least attitude-wise, or at least feeling and momentum. God, what is his name? And I sound like an idiot because I can't remember his name.
In which game?
And Blaze Blue.
Not Jin?
Not Jin, no.
Your punchy guy.
Yeah, my punchy guy.
Azrael.
Thank you. I get very similar vibes between those two. Not in playability, obviously, because they play completely differently. That same feeling I get drives me to play and to learn and to get good with the character. So White Fang is definitely one of my new favorites. So I'm excited. I'm excited to have him return.
Oh, and there's more news. I'm scrolling through eventhubs.com right now, pulling as much news as I can. There's more information that came out, and I did want to touch. Guilty Gear Strive did get announced also for PlayStation 5 and Steam, or PC release in general, and that was expected. Fighting games have been migrating to PC more and more frequently now, especially out of Japan, and that's a positive trend to be seeing. There was also news about the latest Capcom Pro Tour. 15 of the top 16 players were all playing on PC. Only one person was playing on PS4. Once again, a very positive trend to see as there's a lot of good performance that comes out of PC.
Well, I mean, not to be that guy, but your $2,000 PC better perform, or better outperform my $300 PlayStation. I'm just
True, and PCs are getting more affordable to build as the market continues to grow in competition and there's more demand for it. But for Nagoriyuki has been confirmed to also be a vampire, which makes sense because I was looking at his gameplay and it looked like very similar graphic effects when he was doing certain strikes as Ragna from the BlazBlue series, who can steal health with his special attacks. And so this confirms that Nagoriyuki is a samurai vampire in Guilty Gear Strive. So that's pretty neat.
a vampire.
And then the last, they're saying Dragon Ball Fighters is going to get their next DLC announcement later this month in August. Harada put out a tweet the other day saying that over 60% of players from the data they have from Soul Calibur 6, Tekken 7, and Dragon Ball Fighters shows that people are using Wi-Fi, which makes sense. It's very convenient to play on Wi-Fi. And lastly, Fighting Layer EX, or
Wow.
Fighting EX Layer
Mhm.
from, is that SNK? I'm trying to pull up the, from Arika, developer Arika, who had partnered previously with Capcom to make the Street Fighter EX games on PlayStation 1 and 2, have officially released for PlayStation 4 and PC rollback netcode upgrade. So that's awesome. Once again, great to see rollback netcode making it into more Japanese games, and that's going to be better for the community at large.
Yep.
So that's it for the news there. Just wanted to quickly touch on that since it did happen this weekend, and it's all app. Did you have any other last thoughts on the news there?
No, you pretty much covered everything, and I said everything I had to say about it. And a lot of this is wait and see. It's
Absolutely.
sometimes developers will surprise you. Other times they will disappoint you. But I remain optimistic, and you know how I am. It says I can read everything in the world, but I have to get in there with my hands. I have to feel it out. I have to see what's going on before I can make any actual decision. So once all this gets through, and we decide to make an episode after that, then I'll be able to discuss it a little bit more thoroughly.
110% agreed. So segueing back as we build up to our main point here, I think it's good to also establish our core feelings on fighting games and why we find them fun. So talk a little bit about your favorite fighting games and why those ones are your favorite, mechanically, aesthetically, etc.
Okay. Well, if we're starting with me, excuse me, I was eating something. I apologize.
You're all good.
Okay. I think one of the first fighting games, and I'm gonna actually veer off the beaten path a little bit because
Sure.
it wasn't really a fighting game, but it was a brawler. One of the first games I played that made me feel a sense of this is awesome. I need to keep doing this. The hype is real. Was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
The arcade game.
The number 2 or the 4 Turtles in Time?
Number 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was before not Turtles in Time. So I would go to this place called Uncle Pudgy's Pizzeria, and it was around the corner from my house. And I didn't grow up in the best neighborhoods, so I was kind of a loner in the beginning as well.
Mhm.
And I would go to this place and I would get a slice of pizza, and I would go to school. Not exactly a balanced diet for a guy who's like 6.
And I just want to point out how great it is that you could play a Ninja Turtles game at a pizzeria.
The irony was not lost on me. Like, at all, even at that age, it wasn't lost on me. I put my quarters in, I pick Michelangelo, I keep going. That was my routine.
Mhm.
And more kids come along, and we play together, and then it's just this whole thing. And we would fight. Oh, I need this slice of pizza, or I need this house, I need this. And then fighting games started getting introduced. That was the first one. I think it was Street Fighter that got brought in, and I was instantly hooked. There's this feeling of just, wow, I'm cool, or I beat this kid, or this kid beat me and I didn't like it, so I got good and I beat it awakened this thing in me, this friendly, fierce competitor that I didn't know was there. So when they made Street Fighter or Street Fighter 2 and then Street Fighter 2 Hyper Edition, and I was hooked, instantly hooked, and yeah, instantly hooked in all sorts of games. And I play any fighting game that would come out that I can get a hold of. Hell, I remember Pit Fighter, and Pit Fighter was, I believe, for the Sega 32X.
Okay.
And it was absolutely horrible. It was the inbred cousin of Mortal Kombat 1.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of trashy copycat fighting games.
Yeah.
People even accused Mortal Kombat of being a copycat of Street Fighter 2, which is kind of what happens historically because Street Fighter 2 was the popularizing game.
Yes. But to use very basic green screen technology in a game and like the beginnings of mocap, that was genius at the time. Like no one has ever done it. No one's ever done it, and it was fantastic, and it will always be in the Valhalla Hall of video game records. Like it's just up there. But I never forget the moment I played Tekken for the first time. It was in a laundromat, and God, I miss arcades and just arcade cabinets in places. I just missed them.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I remember I played Tekken for the first time. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what was going on. Hahachi had a full head of hair. It was a great time to be alive. And I was just the technical aspect of it, and the fact that it wasn't Street Fighter. As much as I love Street Fighter and the game and the system and the games that base their off of Street Fighter and all the half circles and quarter circles, I love it. It's great. It gave me a chance to take something I knew and jump into something else with like a little bit of a head start. But Tekken was that new. It was technical. It was fresh. It was okay. Well, this one button, and depending on the direction I push, it all does different things. And combination of this, and the possibilities are endless. Okay, it wasn't endless because it was Tekken 1, and Tekken 1 only had like 20 moves per character, if that, and half of them didn't work. But it was great. And I fell in love. And that was the Tekken 1 was the thing that cemented me into the fighting game community. And then obviously Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is the holy grail. I don't care what anybody says. I will fight you in the street, sir. like I will fight you in the street. But yeah, it's fighting games are great, and I made all my friends from fighting. You included. You included, sir.
Right.
I owe a lot to. I love them. I absolutely love them. They are more than just games to me. It is a staple of a lot. I just staple of my friends and where I am, and I owe a lot more than you would think to fighting games and video games in general. So I'm sorry to get all emotional there for a second.
No, that's fantastic.
But yeah, it's true. It's true. You, for instance, are my bestest buddy, and if it wasn't for games, I wouldn't have met you.
Games and anime.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, games and anime, but I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't. Well, I mean,
It's true. Yeah.
The people that I came to Anime Club with were people that I used to game with.
Yep.
So, and then we became friends, and they brought me with, and that's how I met you. So it's one of those things. It's just like something that you think you do for fun and leisure has such a dynamic impact on your life without you even. And I think this is the first time I actually realized it via this talk. So I appreciate that even more.
Aw. Yeah, and the friendly competition, I think, also helps bring our friendship closer, which is fantastic because
friendly competition. I tried to choke you with a cordless remote. I like, all right, this thing is wireless. How can I choke him with this? Because he got me, and I'll openly say it. When we played Soul Calibur the other day. I got spanked. I got super spanked. Some days you win some days you lose some. I got super spanked. I was spanked and I was on timeout. I had to go to my room. It was horrible.
Yeah, it was a unusually lopsided night, and it was funny because, and I pointed out because normally you're the superior fighting game player, and I'm usually learning, and I get better over time. But you've been playing so much longer, and you're just so much used to playing at a higher technical level. It was funny for me to be playing. I was Song Mina. And you were playing, what's the Tonfa character's name?
Oh, Talim.
Talim, okay. And I managed to whoop Talim. And typically that's just not how that goes because Talim, you especially the way you play her, are really good at getting in, keeping the pressure on, and just preventing. And I was playing a long-range character. She is my best character, but at the same time, that long range typically is a bad matchup against Talim. And I got to have a good night. You know, we'll chalk it up to an off night or whatever.
No, but you know how I feel about it. A win is a win. I am proud of your win. Maybe not at the moment, but like, no, you came in here, you did your thing, and it was a bad night. I was off. I will give it that, but I
Right.
still lost. I was like, where are my hands? Like where did my excuse me, sir? Where did my hands go? Because apparently they're not touching the controller. I have no idea.
Right.
So
And that's personally the most frustrating thing for me is when I know I've missed inputs or I'm not what's happening on screen isn't what I tried to do. And it's not I mean not necessarily bad decision making. Like if I throw out the attack I mean to and it misses or you counter it perfectly, that's I don't get upset about that, at least not to the same degree because I did what I wanted to do and it just didn't work. And that's different than the thing I wanted to happen didn't happen and now I'm being beaten for it. And that's a whole other discussion. But I did want to ask you pointedly for the various fighting games you've played and the ones you gravitate towards more to, such as Tekken, can you pinpoint specific features that in that fighting game mechanically that draw you in, the ones you really enjoy or the gameplay feel you kind of strive for? And I know we've had this conversation before between us, but for our listeners here, we want to put these details out there before we get into.
I am I am a huge fan of, I mean, background wise and just the way I try to do things. I'm a huge fan of working out and martial arts, as you know. Giant fan. And anything that can reflect that I can be a part of, I'm super into. And Street Fighter obviously has your fantasy aspect. Things like Tekken and DOA, even if I'm not the biggest fan of DOA, Tekken, DOA, Virtual Fighter, those games brought me a little bit closer to the world of technical fighting and martial arts that I love. So the ability to counter a punch and deflect a punch and to catch a grab, and the grab goes over into a throw, and if they're actually using valid actual fighting forms, techniques. I mean, granted, like there is Kazuya's little spin kick that defies all logic and chiropractic logic. Like,
Oh yeah, there's tons of
that, but for the most
fantasy
part,
elements to the moves or unrealistic moves that the characters do
right.
even within certain fighting styles. And yeah, if you go on YouTube and look up any videos where they slow down the animations, or now with some of the effects in Tekken 7 where they have the slowdown during the last hits, you can see just how weirdly contorted character models can get for some of those more unrealistic moves.
Right, but for the most part, they're pretty much on brand with the fighting styles they are trying to portray, for the most part. And I appreciate that, and that's we escapism into games and anime and things like that for various reasons. But you also need that little bit of real world connection that really sucks you in, and that's what it does for me. Like, granted, yes, demons and the whole nine, and Jin's whole devil emo Sasuke thing, that's fine. I mean, like,
Icing on the cake for you, you're saying.
yeah, icing on the cake, definitely. I take a huge slice of that. But the reality aspects of, okay, like law is based off Bruce Lee. Say whatever you want. And then you got Lei. Lei is obviously your Jackie Chan type, and those are relatable to me. Like I know those are great, and just the all-around playability. Even though you find flaws in Tekken or ways that you think that Tekken can be better, those things may be aggravating at time, but they're not deal breakers for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm dating the hot girl, but the hot girl occasionally, I don't know, breaks every mirror in the house. That's not a deal breaker for me.
Right, a lot of stuff comes down to taste, but also, and that's what we're getting into, is not where taste meets deliberate design decisions and
Right.
design goals, and that's where you and I differ greatly, and I'll get to that a little bit more when I go over my stuff. So keep going.
But yeah, when it comes to taste, I love the overall character designs of Tekken. I like the improvements they make. I like the beginning dynamics in the story. For instance, Hahachi, and then you got Kazuya, and then you got Jin. It's this tortured, like, ridiculous bloodline that essentially you just find out the whole bloodline is just crap. Throw the whole bloodline away. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, it's this person's fault. Nope, it's this person's fault. Nope, just your whole DNA is bad. Get new DNA. And then your surrounding characters, it's just this lust for power. This lust for power has been this big staple in games and anime, and play any game you want. It's always the same. Somebody is after power. It's always after power, not just regular power either. I want all of it, and it's the driving force. And then you got your sweet characters. You get it's I don't know. Fighting games have always been playing the anime to me because that's how I like my anime. I love my my fighters, my adventure games. I get a few comedies in there because I'm not completely
Right.
hard. But, I don't know. It's weird. It just touches me in a place where it's just like I get to be lost in this whole beautiful world of just fantasy.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
I
And I agree.
it's just it's undeniable. If somebody told me that tomorrow I can never watch another anime or I can never play another video game, I would honestly be upset. Like I would be actually upset, devastated. Absolutely devastated. The thought alone, I'm gonna go hyperventilate in the corner. I can't.
So we've established that Tekken is your favorite series of all time. So I want to ask you a more pointed question, and I need a point of comparison. So considering our friendship, would it be accurate to say like your number two favorite game is currently Street Fighter Third Strike, or would you pick something? What would you say is your second favorite series of fighting games?
Probably, God, because they play so similar. I want to throw Street Fighter and I want to throw King of Fighters into the same category because they are
Right.
very similar. Yeah, and you know how I feel about Ken and you know how I feel about Terry.
Right. So
So
let's
even though Street Fighter,
well
even though Street Fighter
let me
gets
compare the
first,
three then because they're very close, right?
hmm,
So here's the question I wanted to ask was on a more technical level. I wanted to get your thought and see where you land critically on this. Is the basic button schemes they have? Like Street Fighter has 6 buttons. They have the light, medium, heavy punches and the light, medium, heavy kicks.
yeah,
Tekken has the 4 buttons for the 4 limbs: left punch, left kick, right kick. Not necessarily intensity. Intensity is tangential to that.
yeah,
And then King of Fighters lands somewhere in between, being a 4 button fighter, not counting extra combinations of things, where you've got light punch and heavy punch, light kick and heavy kick. Is there any specific feelings you have about those different buttons compared to each other? And is there anything about that mechanically you prefer, or is there something else, or is it besides the point?
I don't think that is a deal breaker for me, only because in any way, shape, or form, like in any game you play, you have to adapt in order to play a set game. And if you play anything long enough, we've discussed before off the record that like anything is easier once you learn how to do it. It's and then it becomes second nature. I do think, and it's hard to say this without being completely biased about it
No, no,
or have.
like yeah, we're being pretty much completely biased here, unless we're trying to make an unbiased point. So
Well, I was going to say that Street Fighter controls don't bother me, and I think they're very simple, or most Capcom fighters, I should say. Um, most very simple, very easy to do, very easy to pick up. But I've also been playing this game for 20 plus years. I mean, even with slight changes, the basic formula the basic recipe is still the same. You added a few things, you took things away, but it's still Street Fighter pie. So
I'm more asking specifically between the three comparisons. Do you feel like you have any sort of inclination? And obviously, Tekken is your favorite game, but does that have anything to do with the way it controls, or is it besides the point?
it's besides the point. I don't think it
Okay.
has any personally to do with any of the controls.
As you've explained to me, and just restating for the viewers, so your core point is you play the game as you like it, and you kind of take it as it is. So it's not really a point. You don't have a preference necessarily based on the way it controls, minus those other fighting games we've played where they've changed the controls drastically, whether that's simpler or missing certain features. But in a traditional fighter such as Street Fighter, King of Fighters, or Tekken, their specific control styles don't necessarily provide you your preference. It's more than that.
Right, it's definitely more than that. And sorry if I
Okay,
didn't accurately explain that. But yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
no problem.
But
I
enough
wanted
about me. Sounds like a dating profile. How about you?
that makes sense because I'm much more of a technical person, and I've obviously explained that to you ad nauseum. So I understand if you tune out in the middle of this diatribe. So for me with fighting games, as I've come to think about them, like what draws them to me, and this comes from me trying to understand my biases in order to figure out better which games I want to play and what I'm more likely to try. And now there's more avenues for trying different games, so that has slowly become a moot point. But I've come to understand with my favorite fighting games, I like a balance of offensive and defensive actions. So while Marvel vs. Capcom games are fast and frenzied, and they have a good number of moves for characters, it is always kind of a one-sided fight. And if you get locked into a corner, you're basically there until the combo ends, and then you have to hope that you win out on the next mix-up or the neutral game. So my preferences have tended towards both Dead or Alive, which I like actually on mechanical level. I understand that enough people will probably think I'm just a pervert. But honestly, I do find that stuff distracting, and I appreciated when they at least attempted to try and narrow down their character or reduce the level of gravure designs for their characters. And I appreciate the alternate costumes that I can pick where I can kind of tone that down. But I appreciate on the mechanical level the simplicity. They have the punch and kick button and the hold button, which is a defensive button, and then you can use combinations. They do make let throw be a its own hotkey, but throw is just a combination of punch and hold. But I appreciate not just its simplicity in using straightforward directions such as up, down, left, right, and the diagonals, plus just punch or kick or throw, but they also have that counter hold system. And I've started to notice that because as I've grown in proficiency, it's just not fun to be playing the game it's not fun to not be playing the game I'm trying to play. And even though that's inherent to the way fighting games work, at least in the old school degree, it can be discouraging for some players. And my thought process is what can also be encouraging to players. And I think when you're playing a game, there should always be a way you're playing it. And for some people, it is very engaging to just be waiting to see, okay, where is my opportunity to strike and what's the best move I should play? I think you should be able to be doing actions. And that's where with the counter hold, you could be in the middle of a combo. And if you can make the right guess, then you can break that, deal some damage, and kind of reset things to do that. Or if you're insanely good and you understand the matchup you're playing perfectly, you could win just countering someone's move. And it's a universal mechanic. Unlike with Tekken, where some characters do have counters, they can work in only specific situations, either against specific punches, specific kicks, or they have moves that can counter pretty much anything. But with Dead or Alive, it's completely universal. It's high, medium, or low, and they've changed that up a little bit. I like that it's universal, and it's pretty much everything can be countered, so you always get to be making decisions that could turn the tide for you. It's also partially why I would say Killer Instinct is also in that level. It kind of takes Street Fighter and then adds that extra defensive mechanic that's not just like the simple parry that was introduced in Third Strike. And I know there's alpha counters in alpha, but I don't understand exactly how alpha counters work. I'm embarrassed to admit, and I just haven't done the research yet to figure out what exactly those are and how they work, because I had no idea they existed back when I played alpha back then, and even today when we occasionally throw it in to play. But yeah, Killer Instinct has the combo breaker mechanic, which has tons of fun and still requires a lot of skill to execute, but also is still very much a Street Fighter style game with the 6 buttons and then their own flavoring on top of that, not just visually, but in terms of mechanics. And then also Super Smash Brothers I'm very fond of because they managed to have a unified control style and then tons of characters that just play completely differently, even though all their buttons are the same and there's still little quirks. So there are characters that use buttons that other characters don't, or it behaves in different ways. And you still have to learn that even though essentially every character uses the exact same buttons, unlike with like Street Fighter where you have your rushdown characters or your charge characters or the grappler style characters. And those archetypes are obviously echoed in different ways, but with the control styles being unified, making execution much more simpler. I've found over time that I do prefer the fighting games to just have simpler execution because it allows me to get further into that decision-making process. And yes, I'm getting older, so my hand-eye coordination isn't quite the same, or my reaction speed, I should say, isn't quite the same. But even games like Soul Calibur, which allows you to do the sidestepping a lot easily, or adds in the guard impact, which I sadly missed in Soul Calibur 5, even though they had it with specific moves as like counter moves rather than it being a universal mechanic. I'm glad they brought it back. Mechanically, that's what I tend to appreciate about fighting games. Aesthetically, I've played pretty much a variety, as we've well established here. I definitely like anime aesthetics, but I do prefer sci-fi and a variety of things. Like BlazBlue definitely caught my eye because it was a little more sci-fi than Guilty Gear. Guilty Gear has had a very rock aesthetic and has kind of evolved that over time, but it's still very appealing. And certain characters are obviously more appealing than others. I play Soul Calibur, which has that more medieval style, and there's characters with really cool armor designs, and you can have really cool fantasy armor designs. So that's not to disrespect any of that. And then there's Killer Instinct, Mortal Kombat, and I've played between that, and there's ninjas and all that fantasy element. And Street Fighter overall hasn't really enthused me visually, despite what they've tried to do. But mechanically, yeah, Street Fighter I just feel like is too. They ask too much of their players, and I know we disagree on that, and I'm not asking us to agree on that because we came to a great point. You articulated something to me that you hadn't really said before, and I agreed with you, and that's what really sparked this the decision to do this topic, which was you made the point that you're fine with learning a fighting game and it having the simpler mechanics. And we've argued in the past about the simple styles that have been added into fighting games in addition to their traditional styles where you do sweeping motions on the D-pad or the control stick on top of multiple buttons. And we've played a whole variety of fighting games. Now, Tekken fundamentally doesn't really use sweeping motions. It does for a few moves, for a few characters, but over 90% of moves characters do is either a combination of a couple of button presses sequentially, a direction plus a button, and that could be any of the eight compass directions, and maybe a combination of the two buttons or a combination of them pressed simultaneously plus a direction. Very simple, and I think that's the best way. Mortal Kombat kind of tries to straddle that line of complexity by not asking you to do sweep motions, even though the motions are essentially sweep when you move your thumb, but they can do down forward, whereas Street Fighter actually shows like down, down forward, forward plus a button. And Mortal Kombat gets away by changing that up where they don't really have holds. Instead, they do like they can do back forward or up down or down up, and they do motions like that rather than sweeps. They stick to the four main directions in Street Fighter and other traditional fighting games out of Japan. And there's also Killer Instinct, which is a Western-made fighting game. Use the sweep motions, and that I think part of that is technical, just for the way input reading on computers and on digital devices work. But there is those different levels of complexity in that. So you said you don't really care much for, or you're not negatively opposed to new fighting games coming out and starting with those kind of styles because that's what the game is.
Right.
It more upsets you when existing franchises come out with either their next edition or do an update and they add that system in or try to make you do that because that then betrays the fundamental system and kind of takes away part of why you liked the game. Am I representing you correctly?
Yeah, you're doing a great job. I just feel like now if obviously every company has the right to grow, and if you want to add a little tweak here and there to try to make your game a little bit better, a little bit spicier, try to add a new clientele, it's fine. But if you've been around forever with the basic formula, you can't just drastically change the menu. Not in my opinion. That's just me. But yeah, if new games come out, like you just said, if new games come out and they're like, hey, this is the way this game is played. Awesome. I will learn. I will try to adapt. I will do the thing. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Right. And because of the digital online age that we've entered, fighting games can now be updated more frequently and you can keep the same version and they just add those things in, but they essentially replace all the core stuff. So Lawrence, I want you to go over your feelings on one of the most basic updates that we've had decisive arguments about, but ultimately it's extremely subjective based on what change made, and that's character balance changes. We all know, right? I'm going to throw it to you in a second, and that's obviously a good preview of what your reaction is going to be. But it is one of those things where people complain about how powerful or weak a character is, and that can differ based on both matchups, like what character is fighting what character. And people can get upset because you can play as a character, and I can say this personally also, is you play a character, and you've even had the same experience. You play a character that you think looks cool, but they're not as strong as you'd hope they were. They don't quite play the way you hoped. And with the way character balances can update is that even though they're so close to being perhaps competent, a few tweaks here or there could make the difference. But at the same time, a few tweaks can also destroy a character. So why don't you tell our audience about your basic feelings about character balance patches as you've experienced them?
I need to get a glass of water before this starts. Give me 1 second, please.
No problem. We'll take a quick break.
All right. Okay, so balance changes. I was hoping this topic would never come up, but let's just say that.
Well, I'm thinking of the key story you always told me. I wanted you to talk about that specifically because I can also relate to this. having a more recent experience. But tell people about how you felt about Jin in Blaze Blue
It haunts my nightmare.
changing.
I wake up just screaming from time to time. So Jin from Blaze Blue, I believe the one of the original iterations of the game. I loved that character. I love that character. I liked his play style matched his crazy personality. Very rushed down in your face, like here you go. And I don't know why, but they completely nerfed three of his moves, which destroyed the chain of his combos. Just
Can you? I
destroyed.
was gonna say, can you? Do you think you can be a little more specific about what the changes felt like?
It just felt like a crippling handicap.
Well, I mean, does it feel like the moves were slowed down, or they just didn't chain together anymore, like that
Well, both,
at that
both,
level? Okay.
both. The character was definitely slower,
Okay.
and the moves did not chain together like they should. He had a rapid fire sword slash, which if you kept pressing the button without interruption, it would keep going. Yes, that seems cheesy and very spammy, but it
I mean,
was a
Chun Li
move.
had it. Chun Li
Right.
originated that, so it's
I only
historically
had
a mechanic,
Yeah,
a
and
gimmick.
so a lot of characters have that gimmick. But that was a move that can chain into other moves if you know how to do it correctly, especially if you used your burst, and then back. It was a beautiful move that chained into a lot of different moves. They stopped that about 3 or 4 slashes in. It was about 3 or 4 slashes in, and then the character automatically just stopped. That break in the stop left me wide open, and it took me a while to get used to that. And not the speed reduction. I believe like the health also got readjusted. I could be wrong on that. Feel free to check
Right.
on that.
Yeah.
But the character just felt different. It felt like a pale imitation of the character I knew. Like, oh look, here's another character. You know how certain games introduce clone characters of game characters that are already in there?
Absolutely.
That's what it felt like. And it felt like, oh, here's a clone character, but like not really. And I couldn't. I had to drop him. I dropped him completely, and that broke my heart.
Yeah.
It
Now,
really did.
luckily, you did find a few more characters in Blaze Blue that you really fell in love with. Azrael, as we
Yeah,
mentioned earlier, and then also the red punchy guy who's kind of like a mini or a Ragna Jr., but he's more of a punch guy.
yeah,
So at least that did happen. And yeah, I remember because we played, and that was the original Blaze Blue, and I think they changed him like right into the
yeah.
first sequel. I think it was the change happened. I don't remember you as being viscerally upset about that back then, but maybe it was a slight number of changes because even back then they were doing like DLC characters and a few balances. But
Well,
yeah, I can.
I tried to give it the old college try. I'm like, you know what? Okay, maybe I can get around this. Maybe I can find like tweak it up a bit. No,
Mhm.
it just, I tried and I'm like, I can't do this.
Right.
I, I can't do this.
Right. And I think I wasn't able to empathize with you because at the time when it happened, I was still learning exactly what the fundamentals of fighting games and really starting to technically dive in. So I didn't really have investment in characters the way you did at that level because once you understand how a character feels, you carry that, oh, it becomes muscle memory. And then you bring it over into each installment and you hope the character plays very much the same. And I can remember when we would play, it was lopsided because he not only had a really long sword, he had really good projectiles that also did freezing properties that stopped characters on top of being able to chain. He was a very strong rushdown character with a lot of range. He was extremely strong. And I was playing Ragna, who was the other main character, so those are like the Ken and Ryu of the Blaze Blue series. And my character, unfortunately, I thought he was strong until I started playing against Jin, and while you could also blame some of that on my technical ability, which hadn't developed as far as it has now, he was just a weaker character, and they hadn't really balanced them, and it was definitely felt more lopsided. It may not empirically have been based on old matchup data, which I'm not aware of right now. I'm gonna look it up after though. I know you hate tier lists, but I'm still gonna look back and see
No,
what that where it landed
it's
for that first game
it's
because
fine, and I understand, and I don't.
yeah, and we're not here to
Yeah,
talk about tiers, so that's not really part of the discussion. But
let's said no tears, no tears,
no
no tears,
tears.
no
Dry
tears.
your eyes. No tiers. No tier
Johnson and
list.
Johnson, no more tears.
But then when we got to Street Fighter V, and not to say well, we both mutually agree that Street Fighter V just didn't play even as well as Street Fighter 4, and didn't even that still didn't have quite the same feel as Street Fighter 3. But it was fine because we had so many characters in it, and there was still enough good stuff there that it made up for if it wasn't quite the same. But Street Fighter V even fundamentally played in a way that we just weren't very fond of. I have my specific nitpicks about it, of course, but I was hoping for my favorite character, Ibuki, to come back, and she did eventually come back in either the first or second season of DLC. But because of Street Fighter's mechanics, they ended up completely revamping her. Not only, and I don't know if you suffered this with Jin. Did Jin lose any moves?
He did.
He did lose moves.
He lost 2 moves, if I
Okay.
remember correctly. Like I said, I was so appalled by it. I didn't. It was a while ago, and I just left him alone. I couldn't do it.
Right.
But yeah, if I remember
Okay.
correctly, it was like, okay, what did they change? It was just bad.
Yeah, and I do remember because like Ragna gained a new move over time, but it took a while before he gained it. But going back to Ibuki, I got used to her playing as her in Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which is a very fast-paced Street Fighter game. Not quite as fast as Marvel vs. Capcom, but for Street Fighter standards, very fast, very fluid, felt extremely responsive. Street Fighter 4 was a little more slowed down, but she was pretty much intact. All her moves were there. She was very faithful. Then we get to Street Fighter 5, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait, and she's going to have just a couple new moves or something, a little revamp. They ended up taking out about, I want to say like 4 or 5 moves, not counting the variations on intensity, like the light, medium, heavy versions. They put in some new moves. They gave her this gimmick with her kunai that she only had a limited stock, and you'd have to manually reload it. And I tried, and I was just super disappointed. And her the new move she had like one new move that was pretty cool that could be a strong like middle attack that could also like cancel out projectiles, but even that was like required really specific timing, and was really risky. It just the way they changed her, she was practically a brand new character. She might as well have not been Ibuki. She should have just been a new Street Fighter character that was like friends with Ibuki, and she was the other ninja. Like I was so disappointed, and I tried. I tried to see if I could figure out something, and some aspects were improved, but the total package overall just completely disappointed me, and that's when I really came to understand, oh yeah, I get it, and these changes here can be super disappointing if they completely revamp your character. And it's understandable now how some characters need a revamp, or because the game core abilities change, or core mechanics, that some super big overhauls are required overall characters. But now I understand just how heartbreaking that was and where that comes from. So the part we agree on is the fighting games that we've played, the series. If you're making the series, people come to that series for a specific reason. Yes, the characters should carry over, but also it's the way they play. And losing moves is devastating, changing the balance. And yes, it makes sense to change up certain aspects of balance in order to try and make a character as fair as possible when it comes to matching up with other things. You don't want any infinite combos or completely broken tools with zero risk reward to it. But it's when they change up and make some big mechanical changes, or even when the series itself starts undergoing revisions, such as from Street Fighter 4 to Street Fighter 5, or more specifically, what's coming up now, Guilty Gear is now once again reinventing itself, and it's admittedly by the developers. They are deliberately reinventing Guilty Gear mechanically. They were even trying to do it stylistically, but the fan backlash has been showing like, hey, we come to this game for a reason. Don't get rid of the charms of it. We understand you're going to change it or you're going to update it or revamp it a little bit, but you can't just get rid of the reasons why we love it. And for that, Guilty Gear is kind of becoming a new game with the Strive iteration, whereas Exerd, which I fell in love with its 2 iterations, or I should say 3 iterations of Exerd, Exerd Sign, Exerd Revelator, and Exerd Revelator 2. Though those were more trying to emulate the classic Guilty Gear and bring it up to a new engine with some modern tweaks. And then Strive is now looking to take away, and for example, like they're getting rid of the way Gatling combo works, and for those who are unfamiliar with the jargon, that just means that the basic buttons, pretty much every character had a universal button or a universal combo where there are 4 buttons chained together in a specific sequence, and that was typically from like light, medium, heavy, special to kind of generalize it. And now they're kind of taking that away because they want to change up how it works, and they've stated their mission statement is to try and make it appeal to new fans. And that's something that's been discussed in the fighting game community is how do we grow or how do we change fighting games to make them more appealing to other people, to a broader audience, while still keeping what's special about them. Part of the challenges that fighting games have is that they are 1v1. And a lot of the multiplayer games that are super huge at this point, such as Fortnite, Call of Duty's various multiplayer modes, Halo for the same thing, or MOBAs such as Dota 2 and League of Legends. They allow for more than 2 people to play at once. So naturally there's just a formatting issue there. But also you have like a team of 5v5 when it comes to MOBAs, or with Battle Royales you can have like 100 people playing. And it's wondering if fighting games really need to change in that regard, and that's something I wanted to touch on. Universally, we're just going to say up front, one of the things we need to see change that will help not only give the existing audience more reason to play the games they're playing, but also enable another section of the casual audience to stay invested is the wider implementation of rollback netcode, competent rollback netcode, because it can be done poorly. Street Fighter V put it in very poorly. Tekken 7 has some issues as well that are hopefully being fixed, as we mentioned in the news section. And just having a better online experience overall. Guilty Gear Strive is doing it. They haven't done their beta yet for that. They did a online beta to show off their room, but it had the old delay based netcode, so hopefully we'll get a chance to see if they manage to do that right. And I do want to give a point to Capcom because Street Fighter V implemented rollback poorly, and even though they didn't update, it really didn't fix the issues. The way it could be broken was that it would be lopsided, where one person was having the ideal rollback experience and the other person was having a super laggy issue if both players weren't kind of on the same connection speed. And that could be kind of a coin flip. But they did improve their netcode with the release of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, despite a lot of people being disappointed in that game for multiple reasons. Its netcode is an improved version of Street Fighter V's. It actually functions as it should, and hopefully Capcom understands that and will use that code base to move into whatever their next iteration of Street Fighter is, or if they do another fighting game, or maybe even they'll be able to repatch Street Fighter V in time for the end of season 5 and give that game some more legs. Not that I'll necessarily go back to it, but for the fan base that is there, hopefully that would be improved. So that's number one of I know we can mutually agree on. It's just it should play better online. So Lawrence, I want to throw it back to you. In terms of what's been happening with fighting games now, what do you think you would like to see in the future of fighting games? What would you like to see improved in fighting games going forward?
Let me start off by saying, my opinion is going to be a little weird because, like I said, I come from a generation of gamers before netcodes, before rollbacks, before like updates and tweaks after the game has already been out. So, like the idea, and this is definitely my old man talking, the idea of finding a character, that character being difficult to either beat or being imbalanced was just something we had to deal with. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh my God, that character is super hard to beat. We had to learn how to overcome. There was no update patch that made this character easier or made their combos not chain that gives you a better chance to beat said character. So that in itself bothers me a little. And that's just me. That's just me. Huh. Get out of here, Grandpa. Meh. Back in my day, we had Get Good. Anyway.
Right.
What I like to see in fighting video games, like I said, they're not necessarily going in a bad direction. Like everybody's got a dream, a goal, a vision on what looks good, on what feels good, and anything that can get more people into fighting games, I think is a great thing.
Let me quick back up to that point there and just ask flat out, in your opinion, even if it's unrealistic, it's just completely fine. Just you can go on your gut feeling, your complete bias. It's completely okay. If you could have your way, would you choose to not have character balance patches at all? Like the game comes out, when the game comes out and a character comes out, you just have to deal with it. And even when DLC characters come out, like they are what they are, and they just never get rebalanced until, say, the next iteration of the game. Like the jump from Street Fighter 3 to Street Fighter 4, not counting like middle iterations. Would you want it that way? Or
I wouldn't mind it at all. If you take a character, let's just say we have 4 games planned in a row. And we made a character, and you figured out that this character is imbalanced, or you don't like certain things of this character, then change it in the next game. That way you give people a choice. If my game is part 1 or part 2, and then part 2 they changed it, I still have the option to go back to part 1 and play it the way I wanted it to. I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind if we didn't do the balance changes, because you know how I feel about Get Good. That is
right.
Get Good is a house brand for me.
So because there's an issue here, and I do have a point that kind of counters what I'm about to ask you here. So how do you feel about the idea that if we went with that way where we didn't balance characters, whether they were too strong or too weak, more specifically, too weak. If a character's too weak, leading to people not playing that character. Therefore, the developer makes the decision that that character wasn't played by a lot of people because they thought they were weak. So instead of changing them, they just decide to drop them and they'll just create a new character in the next game. How would you feel about that? How do you feel about that scenario?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Because that's a potential outcome that could happen, and I do have a potential, my own personal solution to that, but I want to hear your thoughts specific on that because in our debates about character balancing, that's what comes into my head where is an unintended consequence of going that way where we don't have these mid-game balance patches. So
I just I gotta give it some more thought. Tell me your thought on it. Tell me your thought on it. I need to dive deep. So tell me your thoughts.
okay. So the first point I have about things I want to see going forward is, and this is kind of a tangled web of ideas, because I think the fighting game genre needs to evolve into more of a games as service, and it kind of has, but it kind of straddles, it won't fully commit. And while we have been lucky enough to see some games experiment with it, where Killer Instinct has its free to play mode, but also you can buy the full game. Dead or Alive has done the same thing, and you can buy characters a la carte. Both can do that. Some of the other fighting games have experimented with free weekends as well as DLC character trials. I think the fighting game series, pretty much all of them, have to just simply commit to being a games as service, kind of like how Overwatch works. And for those who aren't familiar with how Overwatch works, as it's kind of fallen out of vogue in the last over the last year, Overwatch is a single price. You pay $60. They have their loot box system in there as their microtransaction. It's all cosmetics. However you feel about that is up for debate, and the ethics of loot boxes in general is a messy debate. But then everything else is free. Any new character they put out and any map, and the maps are very important for that style of game, is free. Now I understand that might not work necessarily for fighting games because fighting games are real. The characters are key. With the service, my idea is I don't think you have to necessarily just make people purchase a la carte because characters, it's not fair to make people try to make a purchase before they've tried the character, because if you don't like it, you don't. But there's also the other side where, well, we put the time in, the developers put the time and resources into making that character, and that still costs money, and they need to recoup that in some way.
Well,
So
I'm going to cut you off, but if that's the case, then why don't you charge an extra $30 for the initial game, and then just include everything later?
that's a potential option, but that's not where I was going. So backing up, my first point I was going to say with the games of service, we just need these to be perpetual. We need to stop restarting the game, and we need to stop deleting characters. Like I would love to see the next Street Fighter come out and it'd be like Street Fighter Infinite, and I'm going to use the Infinite subtitle just as a hypothetical example here. All the characters come in and we just never lose characters, because no matter how few people played that character, someone's character is always their first character, their favorite character, and they're super disappointed. And even if it's just one, they're not going to buy the next game because that character's gone. And that doesn't help them because of the way online communities work. So first off, I wanted the game of service because characters should just perpetually be there. They're the reason people play. That needs to be there. On top of mechanic appeal, which helps people stay invested and they pick their favorite fighters, as we've discussed. So that's the first thing is the games of service. I would want them to do that just so we don't have to lose characters anymore. We should just have every character, and if they switch to that perpetual development, as we've seen in other genres of games, you can manage it. Sure, it gets huge and balancing becomes a problem, but when you're dedicated to it, you plan for it and you account for it, and there's other ways to monetize, such as selling the skins for characters. Don't sell colors. Colors is stupid. And Tekken and Soul Calibur both show that you can put in a color customizer super easy. Even SNK back in King of Fighters 13, and I think maybe also Capcom versus SNK. I thought I saw a video. Like they even had sprite recoloring features in there. So that stuff should be free and just built in to change whatever color you want instead of forcing us to unlock that. But alternate costumes, completely different looks for those characters. And Street Fighter V has kind of done a good idea with this, but they're like halfway free-to-play economy that isn't free-to-play is trash. So that's my first point there. I'd like to see going forward is we shouldn't lose characters anymore. Games of service style in terms of that. What are your thoughts about that idea, Lawrence?
I don't think it's a bad idea. I agree with you. Charging for colors is ridiculous. Like I've always thought that was definitely ridiculous. But with costumes and things like that, I agree. I for once I don't have a counter argument to your thought process.
Now, also a
uh,
funny point because I do want to go back to the character balancing point. So if you do think of what your answer is, go ahead and
I,
just chime in.
honestly, when it comes to character balances, I think they should give you an option to implement these things. I don't know what that would entail so far as code and coding and things like that. But it's let's just say for instance, like you do have an update to a game, and you hate the update completely. You should still be able to change or play without the updated characters. You could be sitting in a room and a majority of the people hate all the things you do to this game. But then if you can't roll back on it or you can't go back to previous iterations, then now the game is just ruined until they change it again. And that's heartbreaking.
I agree. And here's where the other part is, and it's interesting because we actually have a fighting game that exists that did exactly what you were asking for. It may not be complete because there can be minor tweaks in between, but Ultra Street Fighter 4 offers the ability to play a character at their various iterations from the previous versions of Street Fighter 4. If I didn't say Ultra Street Fighter 4 properly, then let me state that. So that's really cool. And they also, I think, had like their, I may be misnaming it, rainbow mode or something like that, where they also completely went wacky with their character styles. And I think that's fine to allow those options, especially since Street Fighter and other fighting games, even though I'm not necessarily a fan of this aspect, but allowing, you can pick your different supers, you can pick your different specials, or those tweaks that you can naturally go in there. So why not let people have the rollback to those versions within the game as a feature?
I would
And
love that. I would have no complaint. If there was a version, and I'm going to use Ragna, if there was a version of Ragna that you wanted to use at the current iteration, and I could use the original because previous tweaks or might be a little bit faster, but didn't have the one move they added, first of all, that would add a whole new level to gaming. It would be fantastic. It would be absolutely great. Version 1 of Ken versus version 3 of Ryu. And then now it really comes down to skill. There's no excuses. There's no anything. That would be fantastic.
and just to clarify, we're also talking about like I think we're in agreement. You'd balance out things that are truly broken, like truly unintended, such as like infinite combos or something that should be blockable is unblockable. Things like that are like bug level things. We agree are fine to fix. We're talking about actual core like frame data and stuff like that.
Yeah, those things are fine to fix. Like if the game is buggy or patchy or infinite, like you said, that's fine to fix. But like lowering like the amount of health a certain character has, or like that's no. Like okay, this character is super strong, fine, but you still have to learn how to play with this character. This character is weak compared to other characters, but they may be stronger in different aspects. They may combo better, or they're quicker, or things like that. So it's I don't know.
Now, part of the reason why balance is so important is because we're talking about a spectrum of the audience from the casuals to the hardcore tournament players. So the easy solution there, I guess I'm not really appreciating how much dev work goes into this stuff. So saying easy. But the simple solution is that when you're playing like ranked mode online or when you're at tournaments, the tournaments set the rules and you have to play the most updated version. Or maybe they only accept the specific version because that is the one the community decides is right. And that's up to the community. But having the option in the game should be there. And then when it comes to online inside the game, ranked can obviously have a set rule and the developers can choose how that works, and that's what you're agreeing to because that's the way they want it. And then there can be the casual matches, and they literally call them casual matchmaking and ranked matchmaking. So casual and put in some different rule sets. So maybe you only want to play at this version of character or that, and you set a couple different rules there, and it is understandable that the more options you add into online matchmaking, the more you could fracture the audience. But if you set it to some just key rules in casual, it's like, well, I really only want to play this style because they already set options for like it's going to be a 60-second match or it's going to be always random stage or some really innocuous stuff like that. There's no reason you can't just put those options in there and then address that on the casual side as you want and leave everything purely locked in rank. So that would be the solution to that. And yes, it would take more work, but that's what it takes to make a good product. And if you do the games as service model, you can do it over a long period of time and have that fixed, and nothing gets lost.
Agreed. More options would be better. Like, I'd rather have more options and never use half of them than not enough options.
Yeah, and and we agreed. So going back briefly to the point, there's really nothing here that we can suggest that would be new. It's just a matter of us as fans asking, stop trying to change the fundamentals of a game when you've already established it with a series. Now that does get tricky because if you follow that and go back further, that throws it off. But we're talking about going forward. We come to the game for a certain.
People want to stay relevant, and I get that. And people figure staying relevant means evolving and changing with the times. Yeah. But there's still a better way to do it. And
right.
Changing and evolving with the time doesn't mean completely rebranding yourself each time you make a new iteration. No,
right.
You don't have to do that. I mean,
so,
granted, now I'm in my 30s, almost 40s. Been playing these games forever. But let's just say I'm teaching the next generation to play games. I'm playing games with them, and they're playing on a system with a system, I should say, that I also used to play with. So now they learn to play on this system. As opposed to changing the fundamentals completely, they can continue that and carry it on, changing it gradually. Yeah.
So what I was building to is for a game series that you played with Marvel vs. Capcom, that can get us into trouble when they talk about before, like how Marvel vs. Capcom, which started as X-Men versus Street Fighter, that was 2-on-2 originally, or like 1-on-1 plus an assist character, which wasn't actually playable. So that evolved from 1v1 with assist character, which were essentially extra special moves, to 2v2, then to 3v3. So with that sort of core fundamental change, that can make things a little trickier. So I wanted to pose the more specific question is, what are your thoughts and feelings about, let's say we did do the games as service model, or an iteration or a series is set to evolve and they want to introduce a new universal feature or even take one away. Do you have an opinion on how you prefer universal mechanics to be handled in iterations of fighting games?
You mean like the 2v2 and the 2v3?
Yeah, something that'd be core like that, or even like the bursts in BlazBlue, like a version of BlazBlue not having burst versus a version having it, or like when Soul Calibur 5 didn't have guard impact and where it'd been in 4 and before.
I like the first option in games. I think that eliminates the whole being rushed down into a corner. It gives you a chance.
Yeah, which we agree on.
I absolutely love that, and I think most, if not all, fighting games should have a version of a burst or break. Get that out of the way.
Yeah, some sort of combo breaker mechanic, and a lot of fighting games do now.
Yeah, good, because nobody likes being beat in a corner.
Right.
So far as iterations like the 2v1, 2v2, 2v3, I think they're all great. I think you should also have an option on, sometimes you don't feel like playing 3 characters. Sometimes you just want to do a one-on-one battle. So games that gives you the ability to do that, I think, are fantastic.
I'm more like, say you were going to go to a sequel, because the games of service thing is not set in stone. That's more of just our suggestion here. But if they still continue with like the sequels, so how do you feel about the idea of changing those core mechanics, not just balance on a character, which it naturally has to adjust for that. But how do you, because obviously like 3v3 sounds like more fun, etc., or like when Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite came out and it went back to 2v2, they changed up how the tag mechanic worked, and then they added the stone mechanic. What's your feeling on like when they change core mechanics and say we apply that to the game of service, how do you think they should be balanced? Do you think the core mechanics, when they get added, the game should be balanced around that, or should they always be treated as kind of like an optional thing?
I think non-fundamental balances should be treated as optional. I think they all should be treated optional if they're not directly tied into the game's core mechanics themselves. So, but I mean, options, like I said, options, even if you never use them, are great to have. The ability to choose is just a beautiful thing. And most gamers would definitely agree. I mean, most gamers, balance patches, most things we often have because we don't have the option.
It is a weird thing because, like, I'll bring up an example which we currently agree on, but it is something we can discuss it directly. Like Soul Calibur, we are actually a big fan of turning off ring outs, but the games are implicitly balanced. At least, not that it may ultimately affect our experience overall, but they are implicitly balanced about having ringouts. They want you to do that. It's part of the 3D design, and some characters are probably better or worse at knocking people out of the ring. But we
Right.
play with it off locally, and I don't think we can turn it off online. No, you can't turn it off online, which sucks, even when you're doing private matches.
Well,
But
the
that's
reason, sorry,
no.
the reason I like having those things off is it gives me not focusing on my environment or interactive environments or things like that. It lets me focus on the task at hand. And my task at hand is it's I look at fighting games almost like chess matches. It almost, actually, you know what? Exactly like chess matches.
That's very fair. Yeah,
Not
very
only
apt.
yeah, not only am I thinking about what I'm going to do, I have to think about and anticipate what you're going to do, and then think 2 moves ahead in reaction. And that takes a good amount of focus. I need to for instance, we can't talk and play, or at least I can't. You know that about me. I
Yeah, for the
can't
most
do it.
part.
Hey, dude, give it your all. Great. Do not talk to me. Like, we are not friends for the next 60 seconds.
Yep.
Like, but that's how it is. So turning those things off for me, even though it is an interesting mechanic that they put in to give a little bit more life and vitalization into the game, and I appreciate that. I do. Not all the times it doesn't bother me, but I like to focus on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, how many times the other day did you just ring me out?
Yeah. And I think it just has to come down to the developers have to choose their design direction and then decide whether or not they want that as an option or not based on what their intent is, and then they can take fan feedback into consideration, of course, but they can choose to apply that or deny it based on what they're trying to do. For
Right.
example, Dragon Ball Fighters lets you choose between one, two, or they added later that you could do for fun 2v2 or 1v1 matches. The game
Oh,
is
I didn't know that.
yeah, no, we did try it a little bit before, because you didn't have a very positive impression, but then I brought it back up. I'm like, hey, cause I was hoping you were going to be very enthused with it, feeling like Marvel vs. Capcom. You said it doesn't feel enough like Marvel vs. Capcom. You just were dissatisfied in what it was, and then when I
I'm definitely willing to give it another shot
yeah, and
because
I'm not denying that. I'm just talking about our previous conversations. And so then we did try it the one-on-one when it came out, and the characters in the game are clearly designed for 3v3. It's meant to be that way. But at
right.
least they did add that option where you could do 2v2 or 1v1 just for fun. I don't think you can choose that to do online matches that way, which is also sad, but that's part of the thing where games as a service eventually you could add all those options, and then there's the core way to play, and that's just the way ranked mode works. So if you want to know how that works, the online mode is for ranked matches is how the developers completely intend you to play it, and then for casual you should be allowed to do pretty much whatever you want. And at the same time, shout out to Skullgirls, which is designed both to be any combination of that, and you can pick to have a character up to 3 characters for a team, or you could pick 2 or 1, and they rebalance each character their basic stats in terms of health based on how many characters you pick. So they could get like time. It might be 3 times health. I'm not sure what the actual numbers behind it are, but they do have a dynamic balance, so that way you can play 1v3 or 2v3 or 3v1 which is probably repeating myself, but you can do that in any match. I think you can do it online also. I don't know how ranked play works. So those options are there, and even then Skullgirls defies conventions where they let you set the assist command for your character. You can pick from 3 predetermined moves, but then you can also do custom, and that assist move could even just be a normal input. You don't need to have it be one of the special moves, which is kind of groundbreaking in terms of fighting game history and fighting game mechanics. So it can be done, and of course, Skullgirls is an indie project and a Western indie game, and it does have a much smaller roster to it. So you can argue that they allocated their resources to have it there, but it does show that fundamentally this can be done. You can have a successful good fighting game. Skullgirls is a good fighting game. If you haven't tried it yet, you should. It has really good rollback netcode. It's really fun to play. It's very Street Fighter-esque, and you can even treat it kind of Marvel vs. Capcom mission. Like I said, those features there, they have a system in there for anti-infinite combos. They don't have a burst, but they have anti-infinite combo system, so that helps mitigate things in a more natural way, or in a more, I shouldn't say intuitive way, but some automatic stuff there. Shameless plug for Skullgirls. So it can be done, and once again, also going back to service. And if it was a perpetual service game, they could add all these features and experiment and see what people gravitate to and don't. And tournaments can obviously pick and choose what rule sets they want to do. And we agree, more options are better, and the developers just have to have a clear vision for what the intended experience is, while still putting those other options in to let characters just mess around. And that's something also that Super Smash Bros. Does amazingly, and a number of other fighting games with different options that I'm struggling to remember at the moment. But it's possible. So the next thing I wanted to touch on is with the fighting game controls. I think I understand what you're saying, and I kind of agree with you that there doesn't need to be a simple style of controls. There should be just one standard one.
There should be, but I understand that not everyone has the same motivation to get past complicated controls that I do, and that a lot of us in the fighting game community does. Like the drive to get good, to be the best, to master this ridiculous 10-hit friggin' button combination thing. Like, I understand that. But you're allowed to have simple controls if that's what the game calls for. Fine. Like, if that's how you develop it, and okay, great. Even in other games, like if you add a simple mode, okay, as long as you don't force it upon everybody who plays the game, I'm not going to argue with it so much. But there's just, like I said, there's just something about mastering that ultra combo that just makes you feel so good. But,
Well, of course, yeah, there's that mastery, and sometimes you don't even need to master extremely long, complex combos. It comes down to having better knowledge of the matchup and just getting consistent performance. You could have some short combos that just do a reliable amount of damage. I've tried to do the same thing in Tekken, where I just, to train my muscle memory, I figure out a basic input I can do for each character, so that way when I have a launch opportunity, I just have muscle memory where I immediately do that and I just get a solid amount of damage. Because ultimately, you don't need to end the match in one combo. That feels really darn good, but you don't have to do that. At high level play, it's obviously way more important, especially if money's on the line, for you to play at optimum. But there's so much more that goes into that because it's so much more of understanding the matchup and understanding also a player's individual style, which can factor into what they do. But I'm willing to concede the point because I think it's a perfect point that you should just have the one control style and everyone should be learning how to do that. The part we've argued the most on is, and especially I find it interesting because I've said we don't need sweep motions anymore in fighting games. And that's obviously core to Street Fighter, which became the fundamental of the games. And what's really funny is when you and I are having that debate is because you fight so hard to say it should still be there, despite when the amusing part is, but your favorite game is Tekken 7, or Tekken, which doesn't really use that. So in a way, it's almost like I don't understand where your personal investment in that part comes, considering it affects it wouldn't affect your favorite game. It'd affect most of the other games that you don't care as much about. But then again, you are super into King of Fighters, and that does emulate Street Fighter and use a lot of sweep motions and things. So I could see there, like that's a fundamental change you probably don't want to see in that series. And as you've mentioned, you're completely open to new series not using sweep motion because they're their own thing now.
yeah.
So yeah, I don't really have much more to say on that point, but I just would like to see other fighting games with that, and so I'm willing to concede, like, yeah, if you're going to learn a fighting game, it should just play one way. In terms of the control style, not doing the simple controls. I do like them because I do think it helps with certain casual folks, or if you're trying to get someone to appreciate that in a way for people to step in, understand what the cool stuff is. But I can also understand the other side where you're kind of teaching someone how to play wrong from the beginning, and that
Okay.
doesn't help them in the long run. So that can be tricky as well. So I think I'd go back to I'd rather have a new fighting game that tries to do things. And we already have some good ones. Like I don't think Tekken's system is bad in general. I take issue with like there being the rising stance, which I think is really confusing and leads to more missed inputs than actually helps make the game intuitive and fun and more deep. I think it just makes it more. And there's a difference between being complicated and being deep.
That's true. That is, yes, complicated does
Yeah.
not make deep.
And I lean towards Dead or Alive more, not only because of the more universal defensive mechanic, but it also feels generally more responsive to me, where I feel like Tekken, by regards, is a bit more clunky. And we're talking obviously about games that we've played together and are more familiar with. We're not trying to disregard like Virtua
There is,
Fighter.
there is a beauty in its simplicity. I'll give it to you. And you said that earlier, like the fact that it's very simple controls that anybody can get a hold of to get used to, but that doesn't make it a less involving game. And it doesn't. Just because I'm not particularly fond of DOA, doesn't mean I can't appreciate what it is.
Right, and that yeah, we're not debating with that because that stuff ultimately comes down to taste and just how when you play it, you want to have fun in general. So it's about finding where we're finding those points and what we can tolerate, and that goes for any video games. It's an entertainment medium. It's just about not jumping down each other's throats, which we've gotten a lot better at as we've come to understand each other's points of view better. And this is where the discussion was leading was trying to understand what the future of fighting games and seeing our own personal thoughts on what it would take to broaden it because there's the traditional 2D fighters, then there's traditional 3D fighters with Tekken and Soul Calibur, and while they both feel different in terms of 3D, it's still primarily a 2D plane, and the characters just kind of can sidestep around things. Soul Calibur and Dead or Alive also is a 3D fighter that's more aligned with Tekken, but it's a little more, it's just a bit easier to sidestep like in Soul Calibur, but not quite as tight as Tekken.
Right.
And there aren't actually ring outs in Dead or Alive, but they do offer like if you knock someone off an edge, there is like effects in the arena moves on. And Tekken does a similar thing as well. And Soul Calibur though has their ring outs, and actually they don't have any stage transition things. They actually just have ring outs, so they play with 3D in that regard as well, which is neat. And not every edge is a ring out, and sometimes there's obstacles, and you can launch characters over that to get them into ring outs. And the evolution we've seen is arena fighters. And this is more popular seen in licensed anime games. Naruto, Ultimate Ninja Storm, more classically, or more recently, One Punch Man, A Hero Nobody Knows, My Hero, One's Justice 1 and 2, and
Right.
so on. You can see those. Jump Force is another super obvious one. So these arena fighters change the perspective, and instead of being to the side of the characters, it's usually over the shoulder of one, and then the other characters further in the background, and they work with they balance visual that way. So I'm just going to say we had a little technical glitch here, so we didn't mean to derail the conversation. But getting back into it, talking about arena fighters and what's going on there, I thought about it some more because you don't have a super positive opinion, Lawrence, on
The last arena fighter I actually enjoyed was on PlayStation 1.
and what game was that?
It was, I believe it was pronounced Urgies or Urgies. It was God Bless the Ring. It was the Final Fantasy arena fighter.
And even yeah, I remember that, and I did play that too. Even that was still a bit more akin to say Soul Calibur or Tekken because it was a little more free flowing,
Yes.
but it was still over the head and it was still 1v1. And
I,
while the other arena games, or I should say isometric because it wasn't perfectly on side, but it could be, and the camera was way more dynamic. And while most of the arena fighters are 1v1 with usually they add the tag mechanics so that way because all the characters don't have tons of movesets. But that's what I was thinking is, and we played My Hero Academia recently, and My Hero One Justice is what it's called as the video game, and that we agreed wasn't too bad. So we agreed to we would try that every once in a while because we love the series, we love that anime series, and then it's fun to have the games, and also the sequel just added the dub for free, so that's even better, dub track for all the characters. So I was thinking about it, and here's what I want to pose to you is how could we improve arena fighters to make them more fun? And maybe you might not think we even need to have it and it can just be a separate format because I'm not saying every fighting game needs to go there. We need to ditch.
and that's pretty much where I'm gonna stop you right. Like I can't think of a feasible way to improve arena fighters because I'm not a fan. Like I'll play them, but it's not my preferred way to play a fighting game. It just isn't. I don't think that every fighting game needs to go in that direction.
Mhm.
I do think they need to be separated, and you need to have a choice. It's the difference between like not every RPG. Yes, every RPG or role playing game fundamentally plays the same. You got party members, you got equipment, you got items, you got loot, you got bosses, but they all don't play exactly the same. But they're
Right.
still RPGs, Western RPGs, JRPGs, like strategy, like all sorts of just.
And you can say that about first-person shooters as well, which is the giant multiplayer, the popular multiplayer thing among other games, not discounting MMORPGs or
Yeah.
Minecraft. Okay, so what I was thinking is, I think the main issue is that there's just not enough complexity to each character. Like their move list isn't big enough because it's the same issue, and you've complained about this when it comes to like auto combo features. It's boring to just only be able to hit the same button or same two buttons in predetermined sequences 4 or 5 times. It's lacking that creativity, that level of depth and creativity that allows players to express themselves and figure out characters. And so I think if they could find a way to allow those games to have deeper move sets per character. And maybe that might mean fewer characters, because oftentimes those anime licensed games are meant for people who are not super hardcore fighters, not saying that there aren't people who watch anime who are hardcore video game players. There's definitely an overlap, but it's made to appeal to a more casual audience that may not play too many video games, that's already in love with the series, and they just want to get in there, be able to do cool moves with their character, and they want to keep that barrier of entry really low. So with an arena fighter, I wanted to pose that to you directly. Do you think if perhaps it had, maybe four move buttons and it was with directions and stuff, and it was a little more like, say, Tekken in that regard, do you think that is kind of what's really making arena fighters less appealing?
Well, I mean, now that you brought up Tekken in there, I don't think making one game that isn't supposed to be like another game more like another game is going to make it better. If every game played like Tekken, then Tekken wouldn't be Tekken. You understand?
Right.
Like you got to keep that level of being unique in its own thing by itself. Even not every arena fighter even plays the same. So
Right, they do differ by mechanics, and you haven't had a chance to play the not My Hero, the One Punch Man game with me, but it does try to add a little bit more complexity where there is still just a light and heavy attack, and there's a special button as well. But they do add like sweep attacks and launch attacks that can allow you to juggle characters, juggle your opponent, and have some customized combos. It's still not that deep, and you kind of figure out like the best one for your character, but it is at least trying to add some of those other more traditional elements from other fighting games in there, while also allowing that freedom of movement and that dynamic feeling of dashing and over the top specials.
right.
I was just curious if that was something also that you think, like the complexity, like just like with Tekken, like there might be like 90 moves in a character, but ultimately you're going to come down to maybe using a dozen, 2 dozen at most often.
I mean, if you find out something that works, I mean, you're not going to change it up until you have to.
Right.
That's just one of those things. Like you have gotten increasingly better with a lot of characters and your timing and your moving. I mean, I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that we play all the time and you're starting to pick up on how I play, or just your skills just improving in general. But you forced me to change it up. I didn't have to change it up when I didn't have to. If it worked, screw it. I'm gonna do it. Like it's
Yeah, and it's really a combination of all those things, because it all goes into how I practice and how I refine my play, and then of course getting used to fighting you. But you do switch between a lot of characters, so I don't want to undersell like, oh, of course you're playing the same guy over and over again. I'm like, guys, you don't understand. Lawrence rotates through practically 2/3 of the entire Tekken roster. There's like a third he really doesn't like, that just he doesn't like to touch, but he'll just touch for the sake of, it's like, it's Tekken, I have to at least play them once. Like, he's only gonna play Kuma like 3 times a year. And only when I remind him that he hasn't played Kuma, he's like,
it's a holiday. What is it? It's Kuma Day. We're just gonna get fur coats and play bears.
which is funny. I was always surprised when Tekken 7, when people got excited because there was a Kuma in Tekken, because there's always been a Kuma in Tekken. I'm sorry, I had to do my dumb joke for the audience that,
You know
because
what? Nope, I quit. Nope, I quit. This is the first and last appearance. I quit. I can't.
I feel like I feel like I shouldn't explain that joke, but at the same time I also feel like the audience
Nope.
there's a section of the audience isn't going to get that.
I'm gonna be an audio book Bigfoot signing now. It's like, oh my god, Bigfoot. Ah. Just like,
So I'd hope I'd given enough jokes for those who don't understand, and this is also destroying the joke, but I don't really care at this point. Akuma, the character from Street Fighter, his American name is Akuma, or Western name, I guess I should say. His Japanese name is Goki. The word for bear is Kuma. And so in Tekken, there is a bear, a literal bear you can play as, and his name is Kuma, which means bear. And so, using the English verbiage, I make the pun of Akuma. You get it. There, that's enough. I know I already butchered it. It was dumb, but my job is dumb jokes besides hosting the podcast and getting the crew together. So yeah, whatever. Moving on. So okay, but that's the thing, I guess. And until we have an example of an arena fighter that is more complicated, though we also said Jump Force was actually pretty fun to play, but we're waiting for that game to either A, not be ugly, or B, not more than $20 before we actually like buy it to put it in our rotation just to goof around with. So you really don't feel like you could speculate on whether or not you'd feel like adding the complexity to an arena fighter. I'm not saying like an existing one, like a new, say it was a new fighting game that just tried to do arena but add that complexity. You can't really, you're not sure how you'd feel about that.
Not really, because I overall don't like the way arena fighters flow. Personally, like, uh, I mean, it's a cool gimmick, it's a cool dynamic you can add, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who just enjoy that whole thing. I'm just not one of them. You can't really ask me how to improve something I don't like.
Well, the
Like,
core, really
wait,
the
I'm
core.
sorry. I'm sorry. You can't ask me to improve something I don't like, other than changing the thing I don't like. The only way to improve an arena fighter to me is to not make it an arena fighter. Like, and that defeats the purpose of the question.
So yeah, and I want to dig just a little bit deeper in that, just to make sure we're on the same page in terms of what you don't like, because we have to boil it down. If
I don't like the arena aspect. I don't like the way the characters run around in this weird 2D, 3D thing. The camera angles zooming in and zooming out constantly, then switching camera angles because somebody flew around. I just don't like it.
Okay, and that's what I
It-
wanted
It's,
to drill
it's,
down to
it's,
was
almost, it's almost the same aspect as the ring out. It is way too much for me to focus on other than just beating down your character.
right.
Like, I no, and then next thing you know, I'm trapped in a corner because the camera angle didn't cooperate right, and I'm getting hit with
Okay.
kunai or whatever projectile weapon that game chooses to throw at me. It could be a rock. I don't care.
Right. And
And then I don't know.
yeah, so to clearly state, like, you don't like the camera angle of the arena fighter. Do you have a problem with that range of movement, like being able to move that freely, or is it more the camera angle?
It's more the camera angles and following
Okay.
the range of freedom. I mean, movement is never a bad thing, except for when it's like ridiculously far out. Like,
Sure.
when it takes more than 30 seconds for you to run up on a character. Like,
Absolutely. Like, you need to constrain the arena as so much, but I meant more the freedom of movement plus the camera angle. So I could get that. So the reason why I asked that about arena fighters is also because if we're going to talk about expanding fighting games, and we don't have to change current ones, even though the industry is more likely to do a spin-off than something else. So let me pose this to you and see if you could maybe spitball this, because very few fighting games or very few multiplayer games focus on being bigger than 1v1 and including deep melee combat. Now, Smash Brothers is still 2D and allows up to 8 players now, and originally it at least started at 4, but that was still on the 2D plane, so much more manageable in general. But when it comes to like a 3D fighter, and if we're trying to broaden the appeal and address the main issue of only one person can play at a time, it's only 1v1, do you think you could envision a fighting game, or would you even want a fighting game where you could go in and you could fight maybe 4 or 5 people in a 3D space? And for your specific arts, I'm talking about maybe taking Devil May Cry specifically. And could you imagine, or would you even want that, a chance to do a Devil May Cry online arena fighter where you could fight like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other people using like the action move set there?
that's a lot. That is a lot right there. Um, that's a lot. Just to add to that, what would make a 3v3 fighter really good for me
Hmm.
is if, like, yes, I got 3 characters, but the 3 characters aren't characters I control. It's a team effort. Like, if it's just me, let's just say myself, you, and Jim, and we're playing on a team, 3 versus 3, on somebody else versus their 3 versus 3. Now that would be a cool little interesting dynamic.
So,
But
okay, expanding upon that, would you? Because Dragon Ball Fighters does offer that, but it's purely online. You can't do it couch co-op, which sucks. But hopefully that'll get updated. They haven't done it yet, but hopefully they will. There are some other fighters. I think one of the Street Fighter Alphas actually had like what they call a dramatic mode, and you could do
yep,
that. But it was
yep,
also simultaneous, where the
yep, that
all
was
four
Street
characters
Fighter.
are on screen at once.
Yep, it was Street Fighter. I remember that. It was pretty good. I actually enjoyed that. That's what I was touching on when I was just talking about it.
So yeah, let's expand it a little bit more. Are you saying you would want it to be like, we'll say Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but when you tag, then the other players are controlling the other fighters?
I think that would be awesome. That would be fan. Because think about it, especially, okay, now that you brought up Marvel, for instance, I was really good at Super Skrull and Wesker. Those are my 2 like favorite characters.
Yep, and I
And if
hate you
that,
for it.
and love you too. But if those are the only things I have to focus on, that would increase my game so much. All I had to do is just think about everything that these characters can do, not What am I? Not the next transition. Not like what am I? Who am I going to combo it into? No. Like as soon as I hit the tag button, it's off me because everybody has different strengths, and that would like you can create not an ultimate team of characters, but an ultimate team of people. For instance, you could be, let's just say you were the greatest Marvel vs. Capcom Street Fighter or Ryu character. You were the greatest Ryu player in all of Marvel vs. Capcom.
Mhm.
I have you on my team and me and Super Stroll, and let's just say Jim and Captain America. It's if you pick the best character you had, it's oh my god, it's just redefining awesome teams. That would be fantastic. I would love to play that version of Dragon Ball where I could just pick Vegeta and sit back. That's all I had to worry about was
Yeah,
Vegeta. And go.
yeah, that's understandable, and that specifically does exist, and there are games that do have that, and we've seen that in fighting games. So the thing that doesn't address, while it does take a step in the right direction, the thing it doesn't address is the way a lot of other people, or when it comes to relating it to the other multiplayer games, specifically like shooters and stuff like that, or other team-based games, everyone's playing at the same time. Whereas, like you said, it's tagging. So people would have to be interested in tagging, and unfortunately, that's just not as broad an appeal as everyone's in the brawl and they're just taking care of whoever they're taking care of. Could you envision yourself having fun? And I'm not saying on the 2D plane. I think it would have to be 3D. Although I guess you could say it's like a team. There could be like a team points thing where everyone's in their own one-on-one match, and so they're not on the same stage. But that's where I'm asking if you could envision a game that's not just simply a like four one-on-one matches happening, because you could do that in a lobby, and that's the same thing. You're just calling it a team at this point. Could you envision yourself enjoying or playing a 3D fighter slash brawler where it would be like Yumi and Jim are all playing at the same time, kind of like even in co-op and like any of the fighting game, or not the fighting games, but like the action games we've played co-op on, or like Final Fantasy 15's multiplayer mode where that, or Monster Hunter equivalents and things like that, where you have that team of characters and you're just fighting another team of characters. Could you envision yourself
That wouldn't be
enjoying
bad.
that?
That wouldn't be bad. I mean, it's that touches on the core fundamental of playing games. Anyway, you're playing with your friends. You're enjoying yourself. And you can rely on your teammates, and there could be, yeah, I think that would be great. I think that would be something cool to do. Call of Duty, but for fighters.
Okay. Oh, and I know Tekken's experimented with different single player modes over the years. Did they ever have one of those co-op campaign modes where it was like a brawl, more of like Tekken? They shoehorned it into a brawler style.
Yeah, we had Tekken Force.
Did Tekken Force have co-op?
I don't remember. It was for 3. I don't. I played Tekken
Okay.
3 by myself like a lot.
Well, didn't Tekken 6 also have? Because I think
Yeah,
Tekken 6 is more specifically what I'm thinking.
I think it was Tekken. Yeah, Tekken 6 had the Devil Within. It was a side. It was a side story for Jin and Devil Jin.
I thought
When,
Lars was also playable.
wait, no, that was it. Was Devil Within? Was that 5? I think Devil Within might have been 5.
Okay.
But yeah, they did have the story mode for the treasure weird arcade
Okay.
mode Tekken 6. Yeah.
And that leads me to, because I really wanted to bring up this example, is there was one game that tried to straddle that line and tried to both expand action games and multiplayer fighting in terms of what we're talking about. Because clearly we've played Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and action games like that, God of War, and those games are kind of built like fighting games, right? In terms of you're focused on a single character, but in a lot of ways with the way they have the different combos and special moves, it's very similar to fighting games. Wouldn't you agree?
One more time, I apologize.
Sure. On that point, like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and God of War, and other action games like those, wouldn't you say they're very similar to fighting games in terms of how, like, even though you're focused on just one character, like the depth of that character's moveset with the different combos and the different special moves, wouldn't you say that they're kind of like a single character from a fighting game given their own game?
Yeah, it's almost those games pretty much remind me. Or I'm sorry, the Gundam games and the what's that
Oh, and
game?
like Virtual On?
Yeah, they remind me of that. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, they definitely are one-sided fighting games, I guess you can call them.
Okay. So the game I wanted to highlight, and I mentioned this to you before, Anarchy Reigns, or Max Anarchy in Japan. And that was made by Platinum Games, who are the developers of Bayonetta, Vanquish, former members of Studio Clover from within Capcom, who made Okami and Beautiful Joe. they moved on. And so Platinum Games put out this game back in the Xbox 360 and PS3 era called Anarchy Reigns, which was sort of a spiritual successor to Mad World, which was put out on the Nintendo Wii.
I remember. I remember both games.
They took most of the characters from Mad World and they kind of repurposed them, and it was like a pseudo sequel. I don't really think they were completely connected. I think they just kind of recycled and repurposed. But what they tried to do there was create that, in my opinion, what is kind of the next gen of fighting games. It unfortunately didn't work because it was kind of jank in terms of certain animations. The graphics and the character designs, I think, weren't very broadly appealing, unfortunately. Though I thought they were mostly fine, but they were like gritty, realistic anime-styled characters that exaggerated realistic anime look, among other things. But there were like 16 characters by default, and Bayonetta was a bonus DLC character they released later. But it had the exact same thing we're talking about, where every character essentially had a action game style move list, but there was like combos that you could experiment with, multiple moves. You could move around the 3D arena, and you could have one-on-one matches, as me and Jim had a bunch, and that's why we were trying to set something up so you could play with us, and we might still be able to make something happen in the future at some point. But we'll figure that out. Unfortunately, the game has not been ported. It was never brought to PC, which is super sad. Hopefully someday Sega will allow Platinum to do that, or maybe Platinum will make a new game and try to redo that in that type of thing. But it could be action, and they did have not only just battle royale modes where you like 8 players could jump in and they'd be fighting each other and trying to get as many kills, but there were also some objectives, and you could play team matches, or there was like a extreme NFL blitz style football game they had where everyone could not only fight, but the goal was someone would carry a ball around and you're trying to score in the goals. So they tried to bring that up, and there were some aspects you wouldn't have been too excited about, which there was like environmental hazards or items on stages, but you could pick very plain stages and turn some of that off in the customization, if I'm remembering correctly. But that was the thing I felt like this is the template for like the future fighting games that could possibly take off and let more people get in on what's fun about melee combat. Because while shooting, and I'm not putting down first person or third person shooters, it's a different style of game, and there's a different visceral feeling you get from your character punching and hitting someone than it is shooting. And it's probably similar to when people how someone who manages to get like a sniper headshot feels different than someone who guns down with a machine gun versus someone who gets a kill with a grenade versus someone who's able to like stealth melee kill. Like each one is a different type of feeling, and that's where like fighting games have that a specific thing where doing an awesome combo and killing your opponent with that has its own level of satisfaction that isn't replicated with using a gun. Even if a character does have a gun, if it's part of the combo, that's different. But you understand, it's like
Well,
that action movie feeling.
But that's kind of what I was saying before. I mean, in a different aspect. You said using your skills to get a combo to kill a character is more satisfying than using a gun to kill a character. It's the same thing for me as in mastering that 10-hit combo to take down a character than using a one-button auto combo. Yes, you can get the job done, but like, where's the satisfaction? So that's that's how I feel about it.
Right, and then just to state my side of that argument, not that we have to have that debate further here, is that I think you can still have that hard to do 10-hit combo, but it doesn't need to be as difficult. Like if you're mixing in special moves, I think you're not really losing anything from a player having an easier time doing at least maybe the first 3 hits of that combo, or just not having to do the sweep motions for any of the special moves in there. It does make it a little bit easier, but I honestly don't think in practice you would find it as unpersonally satisfying as you might be thinking it is, just because the execution isn't as difficult.
But
Like it,
I think that comes down to just personal taste because we discussed this before. I don't find the difficult, grueling moves unsatisfying. I don't. I don't find it. I don't find it tedious at all. It's like, okay, here's a challenge. I'm going to overcome it. That's how I look at it. So I don't know. I don't mind the difficulty of learning these things. It makes me feel better when I perfect them. That's
right,
just me.
and I hear your perspective on that, and that's true. And sometimes people like things to be complicated for the sake of their own personal reasons, or they like I should, because I'm not trying to be disrespect your thought. So it is true that people do like things a certain way, whether that's simpler or more complicated. But it is technically a weirder perspective for someone to deliberately want something just or a certain aspect, like they just want things to be complicated to feel better about why they're doing the complicated thing.
I think you
Uh,
misunderstand me. I don't. It's not that I want it to be complicated, but if it is, I don't mind it. If that makes any sense. If
yeah,
you told,
yeah, I get what
and
you're, and that, but that also like the way you say that too also seems like a weird contradiction
and,
for
and, and I get it, and
yeah.
people are flawed, and I apologize for being human. Um, I
No
apologize.
apologies necessary.
I apologize for being human every day. But yeah, I understand how that sounds weird. If you gave me $20, great. I will openly accept that. But if you told me, hey, help me with these groceries and I'll give you $20, I'll do that too. like,
Well,
like,
okay, I guess to go off that analogy, and we are, I guess we're getting into it, but I don't want to carry it too much further. Is so use that $20 analogy. It's more like you're talking about, yo, I used to have to deliver the mail by getting in the mail truck, driving to each house, and dropping off each letter inside the box for $20. And yes, obviously that's completely not realistic. We're just using an example here. Whereas if I offered you, well, hey, what if you could just sit in the office and you didn't have to leave your house. You can just fly this drone which carries all the same mail, and you can just have you can fly the drone to each mailbox, and then that way you never have to be out in the elements again or have to drive in traffic. And you going, nah, I'd rather just drive around. It's like it's about talking about something becoming simpler. And yes, I get in that analogy. There's other like intrinsic benefits to
yeah,
driving around and things like
you know,
that.
there are other aspects
But
to it. But I understand what you're saying. Why have it be difficult when it doesn't have to be difficult? But sometimes
and
you
it can
get
be a
stuck,
little less difficult because like
and I get
I'm not disagreeing with you that you should have it shouldn't be depending on the game of course it like that 10 hit landing those 10 attacks should still take a certain amount of precision, but I'm just saying it doesn't like I don't need to be doing quarter circles in the middle of that. Just let me do the single directions, especially when we can prove with Tekken that it can be just as satisfying or more satisfying in your case maybe to do those moves and you never have to touch a quarter circle once except in really rare occasion. That's where it's like it's funny when I say that for Street Fighter and you go, nah, don't do that. When already your favorite fighting game doesn't have any of that.
yeah, but Tekken is also not Street Fighter. Street Fighter built its whole empire off of half and quarter circles. You can't change it. It is rooted into everything it is. Cannot change it.
And that's the part when you articulated it the other day that made more sense to me is like, okay, it's not even about the matter of making Street Fighter more intuitive or maybe more appealing to other people. It's about the fact that street people come to Street Fighter for a specific experience and you're changing that, which means you're taking that away from them. And on
Exactly.
that point, coming full circle is where I completely agreed with you, and I think that point stands and I can understand that. So that's where it comes down to, just like with everything else. There's certain games you play because you love the feel of it, and when they change those things in the series, and I've experienced this with not only just multiplayer but single player games as well, where I come to this series for a specific reason, looking at you, Resident Evil, and then you didn't keep that and you changed it because you thought this is the way that will get more people to sell it when you didn't respect the whole reason it was popular in the first place. And there's other things you could change that make sense and would work, just like the whole moving and shooting thing with Resident Evil, but then the direction they took with 5 and 6 and trying to make it like way more actiony than it should have and less of a horror game, yada yada. And they course corrected eventually, and we got Resident Evil 2 and 3. And yes, 3 I'm a little disappointed in, but overall it keeps most of the things I like about it. It just I wanted there to be more. But 2 is the perfect example of the course correction that needed to happen. Revelations 2, the episodic thing was weird, but everything else about that I was really into. So for those, but then yeah, applying that to fighting games, it's like the way you told me explains it. Like, look, it's okay for you to not like Street Fighter, but if you take away quarter circles in the neck in Street Fighter 6, you're also probably nuking the audience that was into Street Fighter 5 and 4 and all those beforehand because it's no longer going to play that way. And that makes perfect sense. And in that regard, I don't want to disrespect it. So you have changed my mind in that opinion. I would just like to see a fighting game experiment more with those other things. And I do think it is cool when we see those simple, because that's sampling that simple and what it could be. And they're not perfect. The simple does take away moves. And I don't think you should do that. But that leads back to the point that I arrived on based on what you said, which is you'd be teaching someone the wrong way to play from the beginning. So why even bother doing that?
Right. Like I said, and just to go back full circle again, I have no problem with you creating a game and you want to change it the way and you're like, hey, this is the way this game should be played. Awesome. It's a new game. It's a fresh start. If I didn't want to learn it, I just wouldn't learn it. But I'm all about it. I'm all about it.
And even then, no one is
But
required to
yeah,
like a certain style of game, even if
but
it's brand new. Yeah,
you're not alienating an old audience to bring in a new one. We're all
absolutely.
equal. We're all equal. We're like, okay, we are gonna love or hate this together.
Right. Although we can also say, because even the fighting game community, and this applies to other ones, but speaking about fighting games, the fighting game community can also be extremely petty, even about little changes. Just like, for example, and I say petty, but we are being petty because technically this is just an entertainment, and we're just being mad about our toys. Like the character balancing thing. And it, oh yeah, I did want to bring back the point quickly for that is I think we're kind of in agreement where like we disagree exactly on how character balancing should be handled, but I think we can agree on the point if character balancing has to happen, we shouldn't be losing moves. It should like there shouldn't really be nerfs unless it's the bug fixes and things that aren't meant to be there, that break the game. It should be buffs making characters better, not taking things away from them. And if a character is weak, make them stronger. Don't make stronger characters weaker because ultimately these characters have to be fun to play.
Right.
So, okay, I think that's pretty much the discussion I wanted us to have today. But before we go, I guess I just wanted to ask one last time, thinking about it more, having said all this now, with the future of fighting games in mind, is there anything specific you'd like to see changed or go back? And you feel free to focus on Tekken specifically, or even Street Fighter, or any other fighting game or fighting games in general. Did you have any other thoughts before we wrap up?
No, mostly just what I touched on earlier is I would like to see more. And this is going to sound very contradictory. I want to see more variety when it comes to guest characters that actually fit a franchise. I mean,
Mm,
not guest characters that show up for shock value. Like I've gotten used to Noctis, sure. I've gotten used to Negan, even though I
yeah,
play
yeah.
I play with Negan like I play with Kuma, but
I mean, he's pretty easy to ignore. Also,
yeah, he is Lucille. No, he's pretty easy.
I don't think he's even that good a character. I mean, once again, not to bring up tier list, but I think if we look at tier list, like he's not considered an extremely strong character because that's the other thing is like you could hate that he's there, but if he ended up being tons of fun, you can hate characters that are tons of fun to play. Our
You
friend
can.
Jim, I've had this experience as well, but to more specifically, it's like our friend Jim in Street Fighter, in Soul Calibur 6 doesn't really like to play Nightmare, even though Nightmare's one of his favorite characters, because in
Yeah.
6 he feels it's just way too easy to win, like he's way too strong. And that's another thing that can happen is if a character is a little too strong, it becomes less fun because you don't have that friction of the challenge that makes it satisfying to win in a fighting game. So that's a
Yeah.
perfect counterexample of where you do balance needs to be this character can't just get wins for free. They need to have a little bit of a struggle in certain situations in order to feel
Well,
satisfying.
you also have you have those people out there who literally define themselves. Like they get off on taking a weak, unknown, or bottom tier, as you would say, bottom tier character
Sure, yeah.
and then dominating with them. Classic example, and I always bring this up when it comes to tiers, is Dan. You know that.
From
Uh,
Street Fighter, yeah.
yeah, Dan was literally designed to be a joke character.
Boy was he.
And well, he's who is he? He is
Yeah, he's meant to be a parody of one of the SNK producers, I think. I don't know if
yeah,
it's actually a character or one of the actual. Yeah,
well,
I think his look, like he's based off of like, well, SNK and Capcom have that sordid
yeah,
history.
he took it's Rio and Robert Garcia. It's Rio's body with Robert Garcia's head, which is
I
why
thought
you know,
Stanton's head was supposed to be actually referencing a real person from the SNK team, or
uh,
am I just completely off base?
I mean, we can always look that up, double back,
We'll
and
have
come
to
back
double
to it.
check that, but yeah, he is a reference and a parody of SNK because SNK and Capcom have been competing in terms of arcade fighters for generations, and that's why it was awesome when they did cooperate. But yeah, and also just to bring up a really cool thing, plugging other content creators, Maximilian Dude on YouTube and Twitch, he's done an excellent history of Dan series just for fun, and you can go through that and see him struggle to play Dan in a competent way, and just see how
But
Dan is built in
I
such a way to be lacking.
hate to interrupt. Just looked it up. Dan Hibiki is a character from Capcom's Street Fighter. fighting game franchise. He was created as a parody of Rio and Robert Garcia, the two
Cool.
lead characters of SNK fighting game series. He's a ripoff of the two characters because the two characters are a ripoff of Ken and Ryu. It is Rio's body and Robert's head.
And that's from Wikipedia?
Yep.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Because I've been believing that for years. I didn't want to be wrong. Just
right. And I thought from other things I'd heard, because I've heard people talk about Dan before, and it was funny when I heard it was a parody, that he was also a reference to some other a real life like producer or something, which could also still partially be true. I don't, but yeah, going by the Wikipedia there, you're completely on point, and that's still awesome.
He was designed to be. That's why his
he does have kind of a Steven Seagal look, though, and that was brought up when I was watching Max's Dan history videos.
Right. Well, there's been a whole bunch of talk about how Steven Seagal isn't a real martial artist and he's a parody of himself.
Right.
Right. But Dan Hibiki's moveset, especially in the beginning, his hurricane kick didn't go as far. His fireball went like half the screen. There are people out there who have done that. If I didn't see it personally, I would have never believed it. There are people who won like tournaments, grand, local with Dan. Oh, that guy won. I'm like, with who? Dan. I'm like, Dan Hibiki?
Yeah, it can happen, and that's the defying. It's a circumstance that's uncommon, but definitely realistic, which is because a low tier character isn't played in very competitive things very often. Someone can get extremely good at learning that character's moves, learning to counter matchups, and can then exceed because those tournament players typically prepare only for the most likely matchups, not necessarily for all matchups, because once again, we're all human. No apologies this time. And that's where that kind of thing can happen, where someone who plays a character that's not very competitive does all the work they need to, and they just they are able to take advantage of how unprepared everyone else is. And that's not necessarily speaking to the design of the character, though. That's a circumstance that is born out of. It's a side effect. So that's where we're differing a little bit, and what each of us are getting at is what's deliberately designed versus what's unintentionally happening. But I don't disagree with you there. I do want to go back on the guest character point there and just quickly state my thoughts on the guest character thing. Unlike a series like Super Smash Brothers or like Marvel vs. Capcom, where the whole point of those games is to be crossovers, it is kind of disappointing. I've realized it's kind of disappointing. I used to be super excited, but now I'm less so, because I realized that with my investment in fighting games, and if I'm really enjoying a guest character, like I like Geralt in Soul Calibur 6, and I like 2B in Soul Calibur 6, and I enjoy Noctis in Tekken 7, but they're most likely not going to be there in the next game, and there's other examples from the past that I can't recall completely at this point. So I would like to see going forward with guest characters. I don't want to see guest characters come from outside of the main company. Like, I don't want Capcom putting in non-Capcom guest characters in their fighting games, unless that's the point of the series. Because Marvel vs. Capcom, I do want to see come back. I'd love to see a Marvel 4, and I'd love them to introduce some more balanced defensive mechanics. Once again, and I don't think that would completely disrupt the experience. People didn't like X Factor, from what I understood, in Ultimate Marvel 3. So that's like one of those things where you can figure out a better way to do that, and I think people would welcome it, and doesn't disrupt the part that people like too much. But well, yeah, with guest characters, I'd like to see that within. I would love to see a Capcom All-Stars. I hope that if they can't partner up with Marvel again, that they just eventually just do like, hey, we're just going to mix all our franchises, because they clearly could do it, and then they don't have to worry about third-party contracts. And that's the other thing, like Capcom just having like maybe who's a punchy Capcom guy that could be in Street Fighter or something like that. Who is another Capcom character besides Dante? Not allowed to say Dante or someone from Devil May Cry in Street Fighter.
I'm sorry, the Streets of Rage, not Streets of Rage, the Final Fight crew.
They're already like in there though, so that which I guess Final Fight and Street Fighter I guess are kind of, they're like cousin series based on how that works.
Well, I mean, you have different iterations of Cody. You don't have the original Cody, which why I'm upset. You have
Gotcha.
You have
new Cody. Oh, speaking of, I think it wouldn't be fair to end a fighting game episode if we didn't shout out in terms of Capcom rival schools. So tell me, Lawrence. Tell me, Lawrence. Would you rather see? Because I don't remember. We've obviously played it.
I would love to bring back rival schools. I love that series. Rival Schools, Project Justice, I feel didn't get enough. Oh, you can also bring in some Power Stone characters. We forgot about those guys.
Right.
Um,
Well, that's a different type of fighting game all in general. That's like an arena multiplayer fighter, and they should bring that back because that's different. But I was saying, from your opinion, Rival Schools Project Justice, would you rather just see all the Rival Schools just be brought into Street Fighter, or does Rival Schools play different enough that you're like, no, no, I want the Rival Schools series to get another installment?
I would rather the series get another installment because if you bring the characters into Street Fighters, you're not going to get all the characters. You're just not going to do it. It had its
We're talking
own
like Dream thing right here, so we're not really
right.
talking about
Right.
realism.
The Rival Schools games and the Project Justice games, yes, they play close enough to Street Fighter because obviously Capcom umbrella, but their specials, their supers. There was a system dynamic they used when it came to combination attacks,
Right. It did have like a team thing.
right, which I thought was great and it was awesome. You can sidestep, you can
Yeah, that was also a 3D fighter as well. Yeah.
right, and I thought it was great. I would love for it to get an updated iteration that brought in more Street Fighter characters. For instance, Sakura was in that game because
Yeah, Sakura was in the first one. She wasn't in the second one, sadly.
no, she was in the first one because it was a Street Fighter game. It was a Capcom ass game, but they were all teenagers in high school. Sakura fit. Now, Karin could have also been another one in there. Makoto, like there's so many.
Well, yeah, there's is the Street Fighter schoolgirls, and clearly with Rival Schools, and they did confirm that they are in the same universe. And Street Fighter V has some Rival Schools characters in the backgrounds of stages, so that's what makes it sad that like they really
Capcom
haven't
versus,
taken that step
Capcom
yet.
versus SNK had one Rival Schools character, which was Kyosuke.
Yeah.
And Kyosuke's special was to bring in Hinata and Batu. And I can understand why Batu doesn't get a lot of screen time because he plays like an angsty teenage Ryu. Like it's gonna
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Like they've done Ken and Ryu all the time, and they do the Shotos. Like Shoto is a genre of character at this point.
right.
So they could still do that. It really doesn't matter. And when it comes to like Smash Brothers, I'm not a fan of clone characters, even though that is a gimmick. I shouldn't say a gimmick, but like that is
Now,
like a trope inside fighting games where you get a character that's very similar to another and just tweaked in terms of the way it is, like the faster type of the faster rushdown versus the slower rushdown or something like that, or like the hybrids.
I loved all those characters from that game. I really did. There was Roy, and Roy was a teacher, and Roy was just Terry Bogard with Ken hair.
Yeah.
He was fantastic. It's when you get a chance, do me a favor. Go look at clips or the move list of Roy from Rival Schools.
Mhm.
And it's Terry. It's
Okay.
it's Terry in a tie.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'll look that up.
It was very good. And I would love to get another iteration, an updated version of that game. I definitely would.
Yeah. That's one of the things where I think like a Capcom All Stars, because although we did well, at least I specifically had the situation like when Arc System did Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle, I ended up being very disappointed, but because the way they made that game felt very different. I wasn't opposed to like the crossovers, but instead they made that completely new fighting style, control style, which they had to because they're pulling from multiple different fighting games at that point. So they're like, nope, we're just going to do an original one that kind of.
You couldn't make it play like either of those things. So.
Well, I guess I would have preferred them, since they ended up making Blaze Blue like the title IP instead of making it a generic one.
Right.
Is like I would have preferred them just call it Cross Tag Battle, and then because nothing else is called Cross Tag Battle, but they chose to do Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle as the official title and make Blaze Blue the primary franchise. But I would have preferred, but since they did that, I would have preferred them to just try and cram the other characters from the other games into the Blaze Blue control style. So at least that was familiar, but I can understand how that's like, okay, so all the Blaze Blue characters play correctly, but not every other character might play correctly from that. So I have to kind of concede that point on just pure design logistics.
I know, and I get that. Whatever, if you have something crossover and it's fitting under a certain umbrella, making the moveset or the system like whatever the headliner is, that's awesome. I think that's a great idea.
And that's a risk you take also with these kind of things, just like we were talking about the arena fighters. Like they take these properties and they're cramming it into the arena fighter formula, and you're excited by the property, but then the game is disappointing because it doesn't quite play the way you want to. So that's a risk you always take. And so it'll be difficult to say whether or not Capcom will do like maybe just take Marvel vs. Capcom's controls and just apply it to their own in-house. If they do it, of course, we're speculating.
I mean, here's another aspect or another thought on that whole thing. It's if you have a collaboration of games and you don't know how to input the fighting mechanic, then I say you can go to the default. And at this point in time, the default fighting game mechanic is Street Fighter controls. Like, I wouldn't mind that so much because if you use as a basis, if you don't know what to do, as long as we never do Super Dragon Ball again, as long as we never do that, we'll be fine. I wasn't happy.
Yeah, the controls can be weird, and I think it still just goes back to the point of it's a risk no matter what when you're doing those crossovers, and you have to mix different fighting games franchises together with different styles. So it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, if they do Capcom All Stars, it plays in a way we end up enjoying, or if when Marvel vs. Capcom comes back, although that's pretty standard. Although they did change, like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 didn't keep the same buttons as 3, but you did. We both thoroughly enjoyed 3 in terms of what it did offer. I preferred what they ended up doing with Infinite, and you weren't as happy with that. But who knows? Maybe we can find a happy medium if they actually end up doing a 4, because I think they did great things in both 3 and Infinite, and that they could. There's a logical conclusion to that mixes the two
I would have
lessons.
been less upset with Infinite if they would have just changed the whole formula. If they would have just changed everything from the ground up for Infinite, I think I would have been less upset with it. Because 2 is its own thing. 3 is not 2. Okay? 3 and 3 Ultimate, that's by itself. If
Yeah.
you would have been like, hey, here's a new game, we're gonna change it up a bit. Okay. It's remember when I talked about emptying the cup?
Yeah.
When I play Infinite with you, the thing that bothers me is everything in my body says play it like 3, but you can't because it's not. It's close enough to make you think of 3, but it's not. And there's that final little nudge that I just can't because I've been playing 3 for so long.
Right.
I've grinded on 3 and 3 Ultimate, and 3 Ultimate did balance changes and updates right. Whereas just like, yeah, we changed it, but we only tweaked it a little. Not so much that like you have to overthink it. For instance, between Vanilla and Ultimate, Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom was a super slow character in Vanilla.
Mhm.
And Ultimate, they just sped him up, which he
Yeah.
needed to be. Thank you, Marvel.
Right. And yeah, there's balance changes we like and we dislike, and that can happen. And sometimes it's a mixed bag. So that can be hit or miss.
Mm-hmm. It definitely can.
Right.
But
And that's also a very personal thing you brought up, is how you're so used to playing a game a certain way, you expect it to play another thing. And that's just, for some games we can be willing to make that leap, and for other things we're just not, and because it's just not what we want. And that's okay. And that's fine. It can be disappointing, but that's where I think we need to see like an industry philosophy locked in, where the developers, and this also comes from the industry being very risk adverse, is being willing to accept that a franchise needs to be so much of a certain thing, and if you really need to shake it up, then it's time to just make a new series.
right. Yeah. And that's sometimes you got to cut your losses and just do something new. Sometimes beating a dead horse isn't always a good thing. I think
Absolutely. And considering how much we've talked about this offline, the horse that we've been beating in regards to this is essentially a skeleton at this point, and we're playing xylophones on its rib cage. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for being on.
Wait, no, one last thing. I'm very upset that I found that funny. I'm very...
That's a good summation of our friendship.
I am mad you make me happy, sir. Okay.
Well, once again, Lawrence, thank you so much for being on the episode today. This most likely won't be your last. We'll discuss and have you included whenever you're available, and when when there's topics you want to be a part of. Thank you, audience. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I'm sorry. My bad. I appreciate being here, Ryan. I appreciate you having me. It was fun to touch on my inner nerd and just talk about things that I apparently didn't know that weighed heavy on my heart. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. And thank you, audience, for being with us today, as always. Spread the love, everyone. Be good to each other in these tough times, and we'll keep trying to have fun. See ya.